Beside the winding river outside Corda village, under the unrelenting midday sun, Aurora sat cross-legged in a simple blue dress. Her eyes were closed, her posture calm, as she absorbed Lumien's conjectures and analysis. A long silence followed his words, the rhythmic flow of the river filling the void. Then, after nearly a minute of quiet contemplation, Aurora finally spoke. If something truly went awry during the ritual on the 12th night, causing the hidden entity's power to disperse and trigger this time loop, then everyone present in this area, people and spirits alike, wouldn't have been spared from its corruption. Lumien, seated nearby with his back to the sun, furrowed his brows. What do you mean? Aurora elaborated, her voice steady yet laced with unease. It's both power and corruption. When it dispersed, it likely affected everyone equally. Only those protected by high-level entities, like the black thorn symbol on your chest, could remain relatively unaffected. Think of it like a dam bursting. The floodwaters don't discriminate. Unless you had a lifeboat ready, you were inevitably swept away. Lumien imagined the scene and hesitated before asking. So, does that mean everyone in the village is tainted by this dissipating power, and has become part of the loop structure? Aurora nodded slowly, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. Exactly. It's not just about being affected, they're integrated into the loop. Even killing a villager might trigger a reset, because it would be like removing a piece of the loop's mechanism. Lumien's eyes narrowed as he recalled recent events. But we killed the midwife yesterday afternoon, and the loop didn't reset. Aurora's lips curved into a faint bitter smile. Perhaps those like the midwife were already dead before the loop began. If they weren't part of the 12th night ritual, they wouldn't be tainted or integrated into the loop structure. Her meaning was clear. Anyone who had died before the loop started wasn't bound by its rules. Lumien considered her reasoning. So, Madame Puali's claim that she can leave the loop makes sense. She must be protected by another high-level entity, untouched by the corruption. That's why she can exploit loopholes and escape. Aurora sighed softly. Exactly. That's also why she said she couldn't save us. We've already been corrupted, fused with the loop. In a way, we're no longer alive. We're just remnants of the ritual, existing as components of the loop. The gravity of her words hit Lumien like a blow. He yearned to refute her, to argue against her grim conclusion, but her explanation aligned too well with the mysterious woman's cryptic warnings. Still, he found a glimmer of hope. But Ava, Raimund, and Naroka are dead, and their deaths didn't trigger a reset. Aurora's expression turned thoughtful. Perhaps because they died before the loop started. They weren't present during the 12th night ritual, and therefore weren't tainted. She paused before adding, Jean Mori, who disappeared today, might be a similar case. Based on the normal timeline, he would have discovered something abnormal after Lent, and before the 12th night. His disappearance might have been inevitable. Our actions only accelerated it. Lumien recalled the events beneath the cathedral, and speculated aloud. The Lenten sacrifices might not have been directly offered to the hidden entity, but to the altar itself, which was part of the 12th night ritual. That's why Raimund's spirit appeared beneath the cathedral, even though his body didn't matter anymore. Aurora nodded, piecing it together. And once the loop began, its power had limits. It couldn't extend to areas where the body was recovered. Those tainted by the corruption wouldn't even consider leaving Cordu. Lumien couldn't help but agree. No one has left the village since the loop began, except for Madame Puali's group and the 3 foreigners. Even you didn't consider leaving until I reminded you. Aurora offered a self-deprecating smile. We're already monsters, Lumien. This loop is the only thing keeping us human. Barely. No, Lumien interjected, his voice firm. There has to be a way for redemption. That mysterious lady said it's possible. Aurora exhaled, her posture softening. Can't you let your sister be vulnerable for a moment? After a brief pause, she continued. If we want to end the loop without dying, we can't rely on external forces. We have to do it ourselves. Breaking the loop from the outside would destroy us all. Lumien sighed. Unfortunately, there's no way to test this theory without wasting time. And you wouldn't approve of the necessary methods. Aurora nodded in agreement, understanding his unspoken plan to test the loop by killing a villager or one of the foreigners. Lumien shifted the conversation. Grande, sir. What do you think is the key to ending the loop? Aurora pondered for a moment. We need more than just to end the loop. We need to remove the corruption from everyone. Based on my guess, the accident during the 12th night ritual was caused by the mark on your chest. That mark sealed the corruption, but also disrupted the ritual. Lumien's eyes widened. You mean I'm the key to ending the cycle? Aurora met his gaze. It's a possibility. Either you are the key, or the key lies with the vessel that was meant to receive the hidden entity's power during the ritual. Like the Padre or someone else. She hesitated before adding, or both. You could be the vessel. If you weren't, the ritual wouldn't have failed so catastrophically. And the power wouldn't have dispersed uncontrollably. Lumien muttered. That would explain why my thorn mark is darker than the Padre's. It's also why he lost control when he tried to kill me, giving me the chance to fight back. Aurora's tone brightened slightly. And maybe that's why the mysterious lady told you to explore the dream ruins. Those ruins might stem from the corruption in your body, or they might be directly linked to it. She continued, her voice growing more resolute. If you can unlock the secrets of the ruins, you might gain control over the power within you. That could remove the corruption from everyone and break the loop. Lumien stood abruptly. I'm heading back to the dream now. Aurora smiled faintly. No rush. Eat something, take a nap, and then explore your dreams. You'll need your strength. Lumien patted his chest. The liquid Madame Puali sprinkled healed me completely. Aurora chuckled. Fine, but at least grab a quick meal first. Even dream chasers need sustenance. With a reluctant nod, Lumien turned toward their home, his mind racing with determination. In the dimly lit semi-subterranean two-story house, Lumien and Aurora quietly ate their delayed lunch. Though the mutton should have been tender and savory, it felt tasteless, weighed down by the tension in the air. Lumien was about to clear the table when the faint tinkling of bells reached his ears. Leah and the others, he muttered, glancing toward the door. Aurora set down her utensils, her expression sharpening as she too focused on the sound. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Lumien rose from his seat, striding to the door to peer through the peephole. It was indeed Leah, accompanied by Ryan and Valentine. Valentine had changed his outfit, replacing his previously scorched attire with a yellow vest, black formal jacket, and dark trousers. Madame Puali's intervention had saved him from severe injuries, but his ruined clothes had been beyond repair. Leah's white cashmere dress now featured expertly sewn fabric flowers, one large and two small, concealing the damage. Ryan, in contrast, appeared as pristine as ever, likely having packed multiple identical outfits. Lumien swung the door open and grinned. My cabbages. Miss me already? Oh, and Valentine. You can change clothes after all. Valentine's irritated glance met Lumien's smirk, but Ryan remained composed. We've gathered information on the matters you mentioned, Ryan stated curtly, his tone implying they needed privacy to discuss further. After a brief nod from Aurora, Lumien stepped aside, inviting the trio inside. #secrets unveiled. Seated at the dining table, introductions were exchanged. Aurora observed the newcomers keenly, filing away their mannerisms and abilities. Ryan wasted no time diving into the topic. Regarding the rumors about the horoscope shift and the villagers' supposed good fortune, Ryan began. It's been tentatively confirmed that the Padre orchestrated them. However, his methods and rhetoric resemble those of a village witch. Normally, a Padre wouldn't concoct such a scheme. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. Could it be an influence left by the deceased warlock? A method to subtly lure the villagers into worshipping the evil god? Valentine's expression twisted in disgust. And they believed it so easily. Aurora chose not to confront him, though she could guess why the villagers might succumb. The eternal blazing sun hadn't alleviated their struggles. Poverty, oppression, and exploitation persisted under the Padre and the administrator. Turning to an evil god likely came with tangible benefits: reduced contributions, protection from Pons Benet's harassment, or simply the ability to instill fear in neighbors. These small victories could feel like salvation to desperate souls. Lumien, sensing the rising tension, interjected with mock helpfulness. Why don't you investigate the villagers yourself, Valentine? Uncover the root cause of their wavering faith. I'm sure the papacy will reward you handsomely for your dedication. Valentine remained silent, his irritation barely concealed, while Ryan shifted the conversation. Did you locate Sybil's husband, Jean Morey? Aurora asked, steering the discussion back on track. Ryan deferred to Leah, who nodded and explained, we infiltrated Jean Morey's home and obtained one of his personal items. Using it, I performed a dream divination. The term didn't surprise Aurora. From Lumien's recounting of their castle exploration, she had pieced together that Leah followed the seer pathway, likely at least a sequence 7 magician. Leah continued, in the divination, I saw Shepherd Pierre Barry. He was carrying nails wrapped in hair and hiding them in a haystack. Lumien's mind immediately flashed to his earlier discovery under the guidance of the 3 sheep. Nails wrapped in hair in the haystack of the Barry's sheep pen. Were those Jean Morey's nails and hair? Did Shepherd Pierre Barry kill him there? Lumien asked grimly. Aurora nodded, her voice calm but tinged with unease. In folklore, hiding nails and hair outside the house prevents them from affecting the family's horoscope or luck. It's typically done for family members who died under questionable circumstances or were murdered by relatives. But here, Barry might have done it because the murder took place on his property. A bizarre act of superstition to deflect suspicion. Lumien scoffed. How many have they killed to hide their sins? And at this point, he's still worried about his horoscope. Imbecile, Valentine muttered, his disdain evident. #aftermath. Following further discussion, Leah, Ryan, and Valentine bid the siblings farewell, returning to OL Tavern to continue their investigation. Lumien and Aurora exchanged a silent understanding. They wouldn't share their darker speculations yet. It was better to let the investigators piece together the truth themselves, as their status outside the loop gave them the best chance of breaking it. After clearing the table, Lumien retired to his room. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him. His mind raced with unanswered questions and conflicting theories. Only after employing meditation techniques did he manage to calm his thoughts enough to drift off. Within the dream, Lumien found himself in the familiar gray fog, the oppressive atmosphere pressing against his chest. He sat up, gazing downward as if his vision could pierce through his shirt and flesh to the black thorn tattoo and the bluish-black pattern beneath it. Is this the root of the endless loop? He muttered, his thoughts spiraling into memory. The thorn mark had appeared nearly 6 years ago. Back then, Lumien had been a street rat, scraping by on cunning and ruthlessness. One day, he encountered a dying old man. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, perhaps pity, perhaps a flicker of humanity, Lumien tried to help. Though he failed to save the man's life, he ensured the body received a proper burial. It was during this time that Lumien discovered the bluish-black mark on the corpse. From then on, he began dreaming of the gray fog, and his life took a turn for the worse. Luck seemed to desert him, and survival became an even greater struggle. But that was also when he met Aurora. Everything connects back to that moment, Lumien thought. The mark, the fog, the corruption. If this loop is to end, the answers must lie within the dream. Or within me. With renewed determination, Lumien rose, ready to uncover the truth.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Phew. Lumien exhaled steadily and reined in his racing thoughts. He slung his shotgun over his shoulder and clipped on his axe, leaving the semi-subterranean 2-story building perched on the edge of the wild. He strode into the dream ruins. Tracking a familiar route through the dense forest, he crept deeper into the tangle of collapsed houses towards the hulking peak of crumbling red stone. n/o/vel/b//and.c//om. Thick fog clung to the somber sky. Weeds rasped at his feet. The whole world was dark and bleak. Soon Lumien left familiar ground behind, plunging into the heart of the ruins. He scanned the ruins constantly, cataloging every trace, theorizing how each might be useful in a fight. Caution slowed his progress, but hunting taught caution and carefulness above all. Finally, a clue. Fresh footprints, seemingly human, tucked behind a jumble of rubble at the road's edge, cunningly concealed. This one knows how to move unseen, capable of eliminating traces to a certain extent. Lumion observed for a while and made a preliminary judgment. He suspected that it was something similar to the shotgun monster, perhaps bearing clues to Sequence 8 of the Hunter's Pathway. Experience and Aurora's speculation told him 3 types of monsters likely infested these ruins. The first bore no boons or beyonder characteristics, like Noodle Man or the Mouth Orifice monster, probably under the sway of that hidden being called Inevitability. The second displayed beyonder characteristics but no boons, typified by the shotgun monster. The black thorn on Lumion's chest would suppress them. It meant that they were tainted by some hidden corruption, resulting in them turning into monsters. The third showed no boons or beyonder characteristics, mere humans or creatures twisted into horrors like the skinless monster he first found. Whether monsters with both boons and beyonder characteristics existed, he and Aurora suspected so but lacked proof. Therefore, it was very likely that a monster with hunter traits possessed beyonder characteristics. Lumion tracked the footprints and discovered 2 lethal traps along the way, validating his hypothesis. Had he not tread carefully, or lacked his hunter abilities, he might have become prey instead of predator. Soon the footprints grew fresher. This meant a high probability of encountering his target if he pressed on. Rather than rushing to greet his target, Lumion circled around and located an ideal ambush spot. Then he began to dance. Amid the intangible melody, he stamped with powerful steps and spun in a gentle, graceful semicircle, reenacting Noodle Man's strange, mysterious sacrificial dance. His skills were rough and rusty, but with his dancer power, Lumion felt his chest heat up. After undoing his shirt and confirming the black thorn symbol's materialization, Lumion climbed into the collapsed house's center and settled into his chosen hiding place. He quickly glanced into the distance and spied a figure digging a trap. It was certainly a person, but its whole body was charred black, and crimson flames blazed on its surface endlessly. No way it's a pyromaniac, right? I've landed a big one. Lumion was both thrilled and vexed. He was thrilled that the primary ingredient matching a Sequence 8 provoker had appeared. What troubled him was that it was much stronger than the prey he had anticipated. Pyromaniac was a Sequence 7 of the Hunter Pathway. According to Aurora, it was a sequence that had undergone a qualitative change. Its ancient name was Fire Mage. Lumion believed that with him being a hunter, a dancer, and possessing the black thorn symbol, as long as he wasn't careless, hunting a provoker monster shouldn't be an issue. However, he wasn't confident against a Sequence 7 pyromaniac. As long as the monster attacked him from afar, it might not be weakened by the black thorn symbol. After some thought, Lumion decided to retreat. He planned to devise an effective plan to handle the flaming monster after setting up a targeted trap. His initial idea was to head home and dance the dance that could summon the strange objects in the surrounding area, and see what kind of adverse effects it would have on him when allowing the remnant spirit of the Mouth Orifice monster to possess him. If it wasn't severe and acceptable, he could borrow the other party's ability in the future, such as invisibility. Lumion wasn't too worried about the aftereffects of being possessed, or whether the vengeful spirit would be willing to leave after successfully possessing him. In any case, he was in the dream ruins. As long as he didn't die on the spot, he could recover fully after returning to reality to rest. Just as Lumion made a move, the flaming monster suddenly raised its charred face and bulging eyes, looking right at him. Not good, Lumion thought. Instead of climbing, he jumped down from his hiding spot. Almost instantly, a massive fireball smashed into where he'd been, sending bricks and rocks flying, erupting in flames. Lumion staggered in a sorry state. When he crashed, he could barely control his body. All he could do was tumble and roll to cushion the impact. If not for Dancer's extraordinary flexibility, his muscles and ligaments would have torn from the twisted movement. By the time Lumion stood up again, the flaming monster had already materialized atop the collapsed building. Phantasmal fire ravens coalesced from flames around it. Upon seeing this, Lumion felt as if surrounded by soldiers with guns trained on him. Without hesitation, he bolted towards the collapsed building where the flaming monster stood. Faced with such a scene, he felt the only way to turn defeat into victory was by using the black thorn symbol on his chest. And this seemed to require closing the distance. Thud thud thud. As Lumion ran, half the fire ravens descended from the sky and detonated behind him, causing heat waves to surge and explosions to reverberate. The remaining illusory fire ravens banked and locked onto their running target. At that moment, Lumion arrived at the bottom of the collapsed building, no more than 5 meters from the flaming monster. In the next second, the charred monster enveloped in crimson flames froze. The remaining fire ravens around it were instantly snuffed out. It's working! Just as joy flooded Lumion's heart, the flaming monster pivoted and fled from the collapsed building in the opposite direction. Hey, don't run, Lumion blurted subconsciously. He circled around the ruins before him and chased after the flaming monster. Lumion chased it for 2 blocks. As the monster was too swift, he completely lost sight of it. At this moment, the searing sensation in Lumion's chest vanished. He had no choice but to stop and adjust his breathing, gearing himself up to track the footprints and watch out for traps. As he panted, Lumion's gaze swept around and suddenly froze. Not far away, a figure loomed in the doorway of a half-collapsed building. The figure wore a black robe with a hood. Aside from that, it seemed ordinary enough, except it had 3 faces on its head. The front face was an old man's. Milky eyes, scraggly brows wrinkled as a prune. The left was in its prime, chiseled and stubbled, icy blue eyes gleaming. The right was a child's, one less than 5 years old, smooth and round, blue eyes wide with innocence and ignorance. The 3-faced monster. That 3-faced monster. Lumion was truly frightened. As he was chasing after the flaming monster, he'd wandered deep into the ruins and stumbled on the 3-faced monster. Despite mastering the mysterious sacrificial dance and activating the black thorn symbol, Lumion had no intention of using the 3-faced monster as target practice. His instincts screamed that this foe was lethal. According to the mysterious lady's words, even weakened by the black thorn symbol, the monster could easily slay a weak hunter. Lumion's plan was to steer clear of the 3-faced monster's territory and practice on other monsters. He wanted to test the black thorn mark's power against enemies of varying might before deciding whether to hunt the 3-faced monster. Unexpectedly, the monster left its domain and stumbled upon Lumion. And would a little dance of contrition perhaps appease you? Lumion thought, taking an involuntary step back. At the entrance of the crumbling building, the 3-faced monster in a black robe and hood retreated a step. Lumion spun around. The 3-faced monster mirrored him. Lumion bolted. The 3-faced monster fled as well. Lumion, who had meant to flee and try dancing, ran a few paces before sensing something amiss. He halted and glanced back. By chance he saw the 3-faced monster retreating. Lumion stared stunned. After a moment, Lumion vaguely grasped the situation. He touched his face and muttered, "Am I that scary?" The 3-faced monster's actions reminded him of their first encounter. Back then, Lumion stole a glance at the 3-faced monster and cowered in terror, praying to the eternal blazing sun to conceal him. Though the 3-faced monster clearly peered toward his hiding spot, it didn't seem to notice anything. Instead, it took the initiative to retreat further away. So it wasn't the eternal blazing sun that shielded me, nor was I very fortunate. Did the 3-faced monster sense my specialness and flee? Lumion nodded thoughtfully, hazarding a guess. In the dream ruins, can monsters of a certain level directly perceive my specialness without me half-activating the black thorn symbol? Lumion broke the monsters in the dream ruins into 3 levels based on how the flaming monster and the 3-faced monster reacted when they encountered him. The lowest level ones acted on instinct alone. As soon as they saw him, they would attack. When he activated or partially activated the black thorn symbol on his chest, they would immediately give up and submit fully to his mercy. The higher level ones would hunt him down before he partially activated the black thorn symbol. After he finished the sacrificial dance, they would cunningly opt to escape. But they couldn't sense the existence of the black thorn symbol beyond 5 meters. The flaming monster likely only remained in fear and associated the corrupting aura from the seal with Lumion. At a certain level, Lumion didn't even need to activate or partially activate the black thorn symbol on his chest. Nor did they need to be within 5 meters of Lumion for them to obviously feel his specialness and show conspicuous dread. Were there any other levels above these three? Lumion felt there should be at least one, at most three. For instance, the kind that wouldn't fear the partially activated black thorn symbol so much that they immediately fled. They would persist in attacking despite significant weakening. Or for example, the kind that were so high in level that they wouldn't react to the black thorn symbol at all. Therefore, while Lumion was delighted that he could scare off the three-faced monster, and seemed capable of doing whatever he wanted in the dream ruins, he didn't dare to be careless. Disregarding terrifying beings that might be higher in level than the three-faced monster, just the flaming monster could incinerate him to ashes without being impacted by the partially activated black thorn symbol, with its powerful long-range attack. With this in mind, Lumion hesitated for a moment before stealthily delving deeper into the dream ruins along the three-faced monster's escape route. He planned to scout the blood-colored peak and surrounding area today to gather information for the subsequent unlocking of the dream's secret. Along the way, he proceeded to a relatively concealed area less easily discovered, on guard against any monsters that might suddenly burst out. Perhaps because the three-faced monster had just passed by, frightening off the other monsters, Lumion didn't see a single person. He successfully passed collapsed buildings and gray gravel everywhere, and arrived at the base of the blood-colored peak. There was still a circle of ruins, but unlike the outer layers, the buildings here hadn't collapsed, but seemed to have completed a warped reassembly, as if they had a life of their own. They were interconnected, as if a strange thorny city wall had been built. The wall was dyed a faint grayish black. The windows and doors of the original buildings were embedded messily on its surface. Some were open, permitting one to see the shattered tables and chairs inside. Some were tightly shut, as if they couldn't be pulled open. Lumion scanned the area and gazed up at the blood-colored mountain behind the city wall. At this range, even with the heavy fog blanketing the sky and the dim light filtering into this realm, Lumion could see every detail of the mountain peak clearly. It was made of rocks and soil, no more than 30 meters tall, but it gave off a towering menace. The color on its surface was unnatural, neither the brownish red of the rocks nor the reddish brown of the soil. They seemed dyed at a later time, making it look sinister. According to Aurora's novels and paranormal magazines, this might be dyed red by human blood, Lumion thought. He raised his gaze higher and higher, glancing at the peak shrouded in thick fog. Suddenly, an unseen wind blew away some of the fog. The peak came into view. Sitting cross-legged was a giant 4 to 5 meters tall with 3 heads. He was naked and had 3 heads growing from his neck. One faced left, revealing anger, greed, and hatred. Extremely evil. One faced forward with a warped expression of pain and regret. The other faced right wholly with pity in its eyes. The giant had 6 arms stretching out at odd angles. Its entire body, including the 3 heads, was made of flesh and organ fragments stitched together with pus flowing everywhere. Especially, transparent blood-like tears dripped from the head facing Lumion. Seeing the giant, Lumion's mind buzzed as he heard a terrifying voice seeming infinitely far yet right beside him. His head felt as if it had been split open with an axe. An intense agony occupied his mind, robbing him of all thoughts. Thick and thin blood vessels protruded from his body's surface, so red that they were about to be ignited. When Lumion woke up from his near-death state, he realized that he was curled up on the ground, rolling back and forth, as if this wasn't enough to resolve the pain in his body. His vision was blurry, stained with blood, and everything he saw was misty. In this state, Lumion felt that even the skinless monster could easily kill him. However, perhaps because the black thorn symbol had been completely activated, no person dared to enter this area. As for the giant at the summit of the blood-colored mountain, it was unknown if it couldn't leave, or if it had been affected by the black thorn symbol, and hadn't attacked Lumion, who had nearly lost control. After regaining his composure, Lumion stood up and noticed the linen shirt beneath his dark-colored jacket stained with blood and sweat. What the hell was that? The more he pondered it, the more dread crept in. With a mere glance, the black thorn symbol had flared to life and nearly overpowered him. It posed an even greater threat than wielding the dancer's might. He dared not recall the giant's visage, only deduce what he could from fractured impressions. An advanced variant of the three-faced monster? Sheer corruptive influence? Aurora was right. There are sights not meant to be seen. It occupies the crimson mountaintop, the heart of this dreamscape in ruins. Does that signify it's integral to the dream's mysteries? As his thoughts raced, Lumion forced down the urge to gaze up at the mountain's summit. If he took another look, it would spell certain death. He resolved to withdraw for now, and return to the real world to recover. He would resume his exploration at night. Lumion spun on his heel, ready to retrace his steps out of here, when a sudden clanging caught his ear. What's that? Curiosity seized him, and he devised a plan to sidle over for a peek. Of course, he would proceed judiciously, not hastily or rashly. He tucked himself into a half-collapsed building facing the city wall, to recoup his spirituality. After a time, Lumion again performed the mysterious sacrificial dance. He seemed to morph into a high priest of the hidden existence, gratifying that existence with movements that could marshal the ambient forces of nature. When a burning sensation flared in his chest, Lumion halted and honed in on the intermittent clanging. Skirting the blood-hued mountain crest and dilapidated city wall, dancing anew, he spied an orange glimmer through a half-open brownish-red wooden door in the wall. A flickering orange flame shone behind a half-open wooden door. Clang! 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 The figure in the room was reflected in a grimy, diagonal glass window above. It looked humanoid, but too spindly in the dim light. In that moment, the figure raised a hammer-like object and smashed it down with formidable might. n/o/vel/b/jan.c//om. Clang! Another metallic clash rang out, crisp and ominous. A blacksmith? There's a blacksmith in these ruins? Lumion guessed, relying on his knowledge. Trusting that the thorn emblem on his chest hadn't vanished yet, he dropped into a crouch and darted to the glass. He turned and peered in. Though Lumion's eyes weren't healed, and his vision unclear, he could just make out the scene beyond the city wall. Shattered furniture and debris littered the space. In the center was a stove, its top half gone, housing a fire. On top, an iron plate cobbled together mismatched. A pewter-black dirk lay on the plate, twice as long as a normal dagger, strange patterns coating its surface. Just looking at it made Lumion dizzy. Clang! The figure pounded the dirk like a skilled blacksmith, hammer blows ringing out in a steady beat. He wore a black robe, decay marring the side of its face visible to Lumion, even revealing bone in places. Another monster? Is it picking up where it left off when it was still human? That dirk isn't run-of-the-mill. It's a tad sinister. I wonder if it's a sealed artifact or a beyonder weapon, Lumion thought. He was less than 3 meters from the rotting blacksmith, but the other party didn't seem to detect the black thorn symbol on his chest. He kept pounding the dirk in silence. Given that the black thorn symbol was about to vanish, Lumion recoiled and tiptoed away from the window. He had only taken a few steps when the searing sensation in his chest disappeared. The next moment, a creaking sound came from behind him. Lumion whipped around and saw the mahogany door swing open. The black-robed blacksmith emerged. There were 4 or 5 putrid gashes on his face that bared its bones. Half of his left eyeball dangled from its eye socket. It looked like a corpse that had been dead for some time. He clutched the hammer in his right hand and the pewter-black dirk in his left. Lumion's reflection glinted in his lifeless eyes. F***ck. Lumion couldn't help cursing. He instantly grasped the situation. The blacksmith monster had clearly been influenced by the black thorn symbol, so he had been quietly pounding the malicious dirk, feigning nonchalance. When the black thorn symbol disappeared, he immediately seized his weapon and emerged to hunt him. How cunning! As soon as Lumion confirmed the situation, he pivoted on his heel and bolted. He couldn't leverage the environment here, and he was clueless about the blacksmith monster's abilities. What choice did he have but to run? Once he escaped to the nearest natural trap, and it was still in hot pursuit, he'd consider counterattacking. Thud thud thud. Lumion didn't run in a straight line, but snaked left and right in an S-shape. He worried it might predict his trajectory and hurl a fireball or long-range weapon. The old Lumion could run on a curve, but he'd have to throttle back at points. Otherwise, his body couldn't take it, and he'd eat dirt. Things were different now. He was extremely limber, far beyond ordinary humans. His muscles and tendons easily let him arch his body in a smooth semicircle. With this move, he felt that unless the blacksmith monster had special abilities, he should reach the ruins 7 to 8 meters away. Suddenly, dread gripped his heart with premonition. Without thinking, Lumion plunged forward, riding his momentum. Sizzling, sharp pain seared his back. The evil pewter-black dirk had sliced him, spurting bright red blood. The blacksmith monster had caught up in a single bound and swung its weapon. It seemed to have shortened over a dozen steps to one. Lumion endured the pain and rolled twice before finally touching a half-collapsed building. He vaulted in with a whoosh. Slithering through the walls and furnishings as cover, he bolted out the back entrance. Being back in this area was like a tiger returning to the deep mountains, or a trout in a river. He adeptly wove through the ruins and buildings, at times circling around, other times going straight. Within 10 seconds, he arrived at a natural snare he had spotted earlier. He ducked behind the roof that had slid to the ground, and held on for the blacksmith monster to turn up. He didn't try the sacrificial dance, because he felt there wasn't enough time. The other side clearly had some distinctive tracking prowess. As time passed, Lumion didn't spot the blacksmith monster, nor did he catch any sound approaching. He didn't note any indistinct footprints around him. It didn't chase after me? Lumion couldn't help but frown. He was glad, but he also felt this situation was a bit odd. After some thought, he guessed the blacksmith monster couldn't leave the city wall. So the moment he went into the building ruins, it gave up chasing him. Considering he had already suffered 2 injuries and was drained, Lumion decided not to explore further. Leveraging his terrifying flexibility, he treated the wound on his back and headed toward the edge of the ruins. After walking a long time, he looked at the familiar collapsed buildings and suddenly felt something was off. It has already been more than enough time to finish a meal. The dream ruins aren't especially large. I should be able to walk out in a straight line. Why haven't I escaped yet? The more Lumion contemplated it, the more he sensed that something was amiss. His thoughts were becoming foggy and disjointed, as if severe exhaustion was overtaking him, or he was about to drift off to sleep. He forced himself to focus, relying on his hunter abilities to locate the path, hoping to get out of these ruins immediately. However, as he walked, he couldn't help periodically slipping into a daze. Eventually, he didn't even know what he was doing. After an indeterminate amount of time, Lumion's eyes abruptly reflected the flickering orange glow of a fire. He found himself back by the city wall and the chamber where the blacksmith monster was. Not good. I'm under its influence. No wonder it didn't chase me. It seems I can't force my way out. I can only think of a solution starting with that monster. Lumion's thoughts slowed and fogged. As he approached the chamber involuntarily, he struggled to perform the mysterious sacrificial dance. Since he had to confront the blacksmith monster, his greatest reliance was the black thorn symbol on his chest. He had to activate it immediately. Amid the sonorous but intermittent noises from within, Lumion saw the door emitting orange flames open. The monster in a black robe holding a pewter-black dirk and hammer appeared in the doorway. Unlike before, much of the rotting marks on its face had vanished, and fresh flesh had grown over the wounds that exposed its bones. Its eyes lit up as it gazed at Lumion with undisguised greed and amusement. This made it appear more human than zombie. At the same time, Lumion saw himself reflected in the glass window. His face was pale, and his eyes were dull. Some of his skin showed signs of decay. He looked more like a zombie than a human. Lumion instantly realized the truth. I will take its place. It will walk out as a human. Lumion, who didn't know what ability had affected him, or when he had encountered the anomaly, only had one thought: giving it his all by finishing the sacrificial dance and partially activating the black thorn symbol on his chest. He slowly but firmly began his dance, but the blacksmith monster didn't seize the opportunity to attack. It seemed to be patiently waiting for the outcome, afraid that additional actions would impact its fate. As he edged closer and danced each step, Lumion's vision grew increasingly blurry. He only knew that the blacksmith monster's smile was becoming more and more human. After advancing some distance, Lumien's mind buzzed. He heard a terrifying sound that seemed to come from an infinite distance, yet also seemed close at hand. This wasn't clear enough, and was very illusory. It only caused some disorder in his mind, preventing him from experiencing a near-death experience. Amid his grogginess, Lumien's thoughts cleared, and his vision returned to normal. He felt a burning sensation in his chest, and knew that the partially activated black thorn symbol meant trouble. Almost simultaneously, he saw the smile on the blacksmith monster's face freeze. Numerous silver and black warts protruded from the monster's face, head and hands. The wicked dirk in its hand buzzed and vibrated violently, as if trembling in fear. Pa! Amidst a crisp metallic snap, a jagged fracture shot across the pewter-black dirk's demon-etched blade. The blacksmith monster crumbled into silver-black warts, and warped maggots crawling across its black robe. The maggots and warts stopped moving, turning into lifeless gray flesh. Lumien gawked at the scene dumbstruck. It was as if the enemy had suddenly committed suicide mid-battle, while he stood by helpless. After over 10 seconds, he snorted at the fleshy lumps in bemused disbelief. So you dragged me here to attend your own funeral? You should have said so earlier. No need for all this pomp and show. I'd have gladly shown up and applauded your swan song. He strode over to the chunks of flesh the blacksmith monster had crumbled into and scrutinized them intently. Nothing else seemed amiss, save that the slightly cracked pewter-black dirk still quivered minutely, like a wounded animal encountering its mortal foe. Lumien's heart raced as he looked down at his chest, sensing the black thorn symbol beneath his clothes. He realized the truth, and grabbed the pewter-black dirk with his right hand. The evil dirk trembled vigorously but didn't struggle or resist. It was docile. As soon as he held it, the heat in his chest intensified. Something leaked out, resonating with the pewter-black dirk. Amidst the metallic hum, Lumien grasped a greater understanding of the sinister dirk in his grip. It was a corrupted Beyonder weapon, gaining power and a semblance of life. In other words, Lumien hadn't encountered a blacksmith monster. The dirk was the true menace. The blacksmith monster was its puppet, or rather wielder. It could gradually transform any living being who touched its cold steel, and drew blood into a zombie, robbing them of will and reason. They would always clutch it and act on its desires. Those who were cut by it, spilling crimson, would have their destiny appropriated by its edge. When seizing one's fate, it could inflict no further harm. Just now, it had bartered the fate of the blacksmith monster becoming a puppet to exchange for Lumien, leaving the wilderness as a human. If there was nothing to trade, he had to kill the target completely to strip a portion of his fate from him, and store it in the dirk. This ability came from the dancer's corresponding sequence 5, Fate Appropriator. Therefore, after the corruption in Lumien's body was half activated, it resonated with the evil dirk through flesh and blood, letting some knowledge seep out. Otherwise, he could only get someone to use divination and figure out patterns to grasp the pewter-black dirk's abilities and characteristics. He could also rely on his repeated experiments to gather information. After sorting out the additional knowledge in his mind, Lumien looked at the evil dirk that was still trembling in his hand and chuckled. n/o/vel/b//and.c//om. Actually, I don't mind you appropriating some of my destiny, but you'll have to bear the consequences. If you can swap with my fate of being trapped in this time loop, I'll kneel and grovel before you 3 times. TSK, but randomly appropriating destinies will only hurt you. The pewter-black dirk merely trembled, not daring to respond. Lumien now understood why the dirk was so obedient. First, the half-activated black thorn symbol suppressed it. Second, encountering Lumien had traumatized the sentient weapon. Exhaling, Lumien said, "From today onward, your name is Fate Appropriator Dirk." Got it. The dirk bobbed up and down twice, as if nodding. Unfortunately, you're only a Beyonder weapon. Your power will gradually fade. You could have lasted 2 years, but now, severely damaged from your foolishness, you'll only survive half a year, Lumien said regretfully. In fact, he could replenish Fate Appropriator by extracting power from the corruption in his body, but that required finding someone to repair the crack. No sooner had he spoken than the heat in his chest quickly vanished. The minute was up. Wasting no time, he hurled fate-appropriated dirt away as if it were red-hot coal. The pewter-black dirt clattered to the ground, bouncing a few times before coming to rest. Lumion heaved a sigh of relief and muttered to himself, "Without the protection of the half-activated black thorn symbol, this thing's a ticking time bomb." Luckily, he already knew how to avoid the sinister dirt's adverse effects. Lumion approached the grayish-white remains and picked up the black robe left behind by the monstrous blacksmith. He tore off several strips of cloth and wrapped them tightly around his right hand, as if applying a thorough bandage. Then Lumion grasped the fate-appropriated dirk. The pewter-black dirk remained unresponsive the entire time, prepared to discard the item in his hand at any moment. Lumion relaxed and whispered, "I need to find a scabbard to carry it around safely. Do I have to permanently bandage my left or right hand, just to have time to protect myself when I need to draw the blade in an emergency? This thing is dangerous, but it's also incredibly powerful. Besides its short lifespan, it outclasses all the Beyonder weapons Aurora mentioned. Many level 3 sealed artifacts might not even compare." While muttering to himself, Lumion swaddled the fate-appropriated dirk in layers of black cloth. Once wrapped securely in 3 layers, he slid the evil dirk into his left belt with a sense of relief. Having done this, Lumion rubbed his temples and, despite his physical and mental exhaustion, entered the room from which the blacksmith monster had emerged. He searched the room meticulously. Aside from the smoldering furnace, he found nothing. Lumion's investigation concluded cautiously and carefully as he retraced his steps. Unhindered by fate, he successfully left the ruins, crossed the desolate wasteland, and entered his semi-subterranean 2-story building. Not in a rush to sleep, Lumion left the room, stowed the fate-appropriated dirk, and rested briefly. Once his spirituality recovered and his needs were met, he performed the bizarre dance, alternating between madness and distortion, in his bedroom. n/o/vel/b//in.c//om. He aimed to attract the peculiar creatures in the vicinity and let one of them possess him to test the negative effects. Having sensed the fear and reverence of the flaming monster, the 3-faced monster, and the fate-appropriated dirk towards the black thorn symbol, he was no longer as terrified of allowing certain entities to possess him. His corruption was far more powerful. Moreover, he was quite exhausted and would soon fall asleep. When the time came, even if the strange being he harbored was reluctant to leave or caused severe negative effects, he would recover after resting in the real world for a day. Is this what Aurora often calls cheating and exploiting loopholes? Lumion mused as he danced. As the dance intensified, his spirituality expanded, merging with a certain force of nature that radiated in all directions. Gradually, Lumion, seemingly fused with his surroundings, sensed something entering the area. He lifted his leg, took a step, and spun around. Without activating his spirit vision, he saw 3 translucent figures materialize at the bedroom's glass window. They were the familiar skinless monster, shotgun monster, and mouth orifice monster. Seems like my spiritual perception isn't strong enough, or my level is too low. I can only summon them. Lumion didn't mind. He drew the ritual silver dagger Aurora had given him and sliced a wound on the back of his left hand. A drop of crimson blood quickly welled up but didn't spread. On the spot, it congealed and took on a demonic hue. The 3 ghostly figures outside the window instantly stirred. Lumion deftly used the ritual silver dagger to pick up the congealed drop of blood. With a final flourish of his dance moves, he pointed the blade towards the mouth orifice monster. He was inviting the entity to latch onto him. The monster, bearing 3 black marks on its upper body, opened its vortex-shaped mouth, as if responding to Lumion's call, but it hesitated to take further action. That's right. The window is still closed, and the monsters in the dream ruins don't dare enter my house. Lumion swiftly grasped the situation. In sync with his dance rhythm, he leapt, landing gracefully on the desk before the window. With his left hand, he slid the tightly shut glass window open. Then he extended the ritual silver dagger, bloodied tip first, outside the house. Instead of devouring the drop of blood and entering Lumion's body through the ritual silver dagger, the maw-like creature retreated 7 or 8 meters, floating amidst the howling wind, still mesmerized by the dance. Hey, come over. Lumian, on the verge of completing his final dance step, couldn't help but urge anxiously. The three hazy, translucent figures outside the house drifted further away. As Lumian's dance came to a halt, they vanished entirely. Lumian stared at the scene, baffled by the mouth orifice monster's refusal to possess him. He carefully reviewed the dance and the bloodletting process, certain he had made no mistakes. Could it be that its fixation remembers that I killed it, so it's unwilling to attach itself to me? But the knowledge that came with Dancer didn't mention this. Logically, it should be more eager to possess me and take revenge. Lumian pondered. Recalling the three-faced monster's flight upon seeing him, he formulated a new hypothesis. I'm corrupted by an evil god, and sealed by a greater being. Are these strange creatures terrified and unwilling to attach themselves to me? This was an extremely rare circumstance. It made sense that Dancer's corresponding mystical knowledge wouldn't cover such anomalies. The more Lumian considered it, the more he believed this was the cause, and the angrier he became. So you guys just watch me dance, but aren't willing to possess me? What's this called? In Aurora's words, freeloading. Lumian's disappointment grew as he realized that, before reaching Contract T, one of Dancer's abilities was rendered useless. He couldn't attract strange creatures and exploit their traits or powers. He consoled himself, hoping that only the Dream Ruins creatures behaved like this. After all, they were closely tied to the owner of the black thorn symbol. I wonder what I can attract in reality. Will they dare to attach themselves to me? Lumian mused, walking to his bed and lying down. His mood lifted as he glanced at the fate-appropriate dirk, ensconced in layers of black cloth, on the cabinet beside him. This powerful Beyonder weapon would aid him in delving deeper into the Dream Ruins and uncovering their secrets. The only drawback was its inability to be brought into the real world. I wonder if that mysterious lady can help bring it out, just like how she brought the potion and ritual ingredients into the Dream Ruins. But the next time I explore the Dream Ruins, I'll have to trouble her to bring the fate-appropriate dirk back in. She's definitely unwilling to keep providing help. She's clearly averse to hassle and prefers slacking off. With these thoughts, Lumian drifted into a deep sleep. When Lumian woke up, the sky was an unnatural shade of inky black. Only a smoldering crimson smear of sunset remained in the distance, filling him with a bleak melancholy, as if the entire world had abandoned him. Adjusting his emotions, Lumian left the room and descended to the first floor. Aurora was busy cooking dinner. Are your eyes okay? Lumian went over to help. Pretty much. Aurora tucked a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear and widened her eyes at him. Lumian peered into their light blue depths, but saw nothing amiss beyond a hint of blood. Aurora continued frying the lamb chops and casually asked, "Discovered anything interesting in the Dream Ruins this time?" Lumian began chopping ingredients for the last dish, recounting his encounters. That blade is powerful indeed. Seeing her brother was unharmed, Aurora stifled her concern with a laugh. If it were me, I'd never call it fate-appropriate dirk. Too straightforward, lacking charm. Lumian asked curiously, "What would you name it then?" Aurora smiled and said, "Fallen Mercury." "Fallen Mercury it is." Lumian nodded immediately. He had to use the name his sister gave. Aurora burst out laughing. "Actually, it's not the best name, but that's all I could think of on short notice." The monster's behavior confirms our theory. The black thorn symbol on your chest, or rather, the corruption in your body isn't simple. It can suppress something powerful to an extent, and relates closely to that hidden existence. Perhaps the key to the loop lies with you. Yes, Lumian nodded. Let's see what secrets the Dream Ruins hold. Then we'll wait patiently for the 12th night. So far, they had investigated almost all abnormalities. Only the tomb where the owl was had not been explored. It was far too dangerous. Aurora didn't believe she, Lumian, and the three foreigners could face it. Her only hope was asking Madame Pualis for help. But she clearly didn't intend to interfere, merely waiting for the opportune moment. Lumian didn't hold much hope recounting how the strange creatures his dance attracted were hindered by the two symbols on his body, preventing success. "Grande, sir, any ideas to circumvent this restriction?" Aurora scooped up the lamb chops, pondering a moment. Since it's impossible to invite a god to possess you, why not try giving an order? Order? Lumien's eyes lit up. Aurora nodded slightly. Since those strange creatures fear the corruption in your body and the seal of that great existence, use their fear like a fox assuming the authority of a tiger. Order them to attach themselves to you. Right, use ancient Hermes when you try. That's an idea. Lumien understood what his sister meant by a fox assuming the authority of a tiger. Aurora carried the plate of lamb chops to the table and said, I'm not sure if ordering them under those circumstances will work. After all, I'm not a dancer, and I don't have any relevant mysticism knowledge. However, you won't lose anything by trying. That's true. Lumien took over at the stove and said with a grin, It'll just be another wound while I bleed a little. I'll recover after a nap. What do you think the three-headed giant at the top of the mountain is? What does it have to do with the hidden existence and the corruption in my body? Aurora set the plates down and turned around. Don't you think you're overestimating me? I've never encountered or heard of such strange things. Without waiting for Lumien's response, she added thoughtfully, However, there are many similar concepts in the myths and legends of my hometown. They have 3 heads and 6 arms, gods or demons. She continued, and according to our guesses, the dream ruins are closely related to the corruption in your body. There's a high chance that the giant's image reflects some aspects of the hidden existence. You said that the honorific name or description of that person is different from the usual ones. Every segment contains 3 aspects and 3 forms that symbolize a certain authority. Therefore, it's very normal to correspond to 3 heads, just like how the 3-faced monster has faces that represent the 3 stages of humanity. As for why it has 6 arms and why it sits atop the blood-colored mountain, there's too little information. I can't guess. Focus on the circle of walls for the time being. I feel that we can find many useful clues. All right. Lumien followed his sister's instructions and placed the sliced shredded potatoes into the pot, stir-frying them with oil. Aurora ended the topic regarding the dream ruins and said to Lumien, When you went to bed in the afternoon, I thought about it seriously and decided to invite the 3 foreigners to stay with us. Why? Lumien was puzzled. Aurora watched her brother bustling around inside. We assumed the padre would react like a normal person, but we can't forget that some of his followers have already accepted a boon. In a way, they're corrupted. According to the mysterious lady, the boon's effects concentrate on the body and mind. So besides gaining abilities, one's personality will shift. The more boons a person takes, the more severe the change will be, especially if they can't handle it. Right. Lumien recalled the mysterious lady's words. She warned that if the body couldn't endure such a massive boon, the recipient would either turn into a monster, become a puppet of an unknown entity, or transform into someone else who'd treat things they cherished in the past with indifference. Aurora concluded, thus, Shepherd Pierre Barry and his followers, who've received the boons long ago, might disregard the Padre's plan and seek greater vengeance. If the 5 of us stick together and support each other, we can effectively improve our chances of survival until the 12th night. Lumien pondered her proposal and agreed. But he raised a logistical issue. So where do they stay? In the living room downstairs. It won't work as well if we're on separate floors. Aurora glanced at her brother, who approached with a plate of stir-fried shredded potatoes. You can move into my room, and we'll let the 3 foreigners use your bedroom and the study upstairs. They can divide the rooms among themselves. Lumien didn't expect such an arrangement. I'll share a bed with you. Aurora couldn't help but laugh. No big deal. Strong, independent women don't sweat the small stuff. Lumien didn't grasp his sister's last remark. Aurora chuckled, explaining, I'm saying that given our situation, let's not get hung up on trivial matters. Do you want to share a bed with Ryan and Valentine? Or should I sleep with Leah? True, I can't fully trust them. Lumien nodded. The 3 official investigators only cooperated with the siblings because they were trapped in a loop. Who knew if they'd secretly manipulate the situation while they slept together, planning to capture the 2 wild beyonders once the loop ended? Aurora chuckled and suggested, if they're concerned about us and decide to share a room, you can sleep in the other one. Better to stay in the same room. Lumion felt the walls offered little protection. Aurora said no more, only adding, "Remind me to restock our food supply tomorrow. After Lent, the villagers will grow stranger. We might need to defend this place, or hide in the nearest high mountain pasture." Then, she urged her brother to eat dinner. Before sunset, Lumion left the semi-subterranean two-story building, ready to invite Ryan and the others to move into his home. Upon seeing Oel Tavern in sight, Lumion spotted a few familiar faces. Pons Benet was strolling down the village's main road with his 3 thugs. N/O/vel/b/jn.c//om. Almost instantly the black-haired, blue-eyed, muscle-bound villain noticed Lumion. He couldn't help but clamp his legs together, as if recalling some excruciating agony. Eyeing Lumion, Pons Benet faced a dilemma. He craved revenge, but feared history would repeat itself with him, and his men beaten to a pulp. As Pons Benet wavered, Lumion flashed a brilliant grin. "Hey, isn't this my rebellious son?" He strode towards the villain and his 3 thugs who had drowned Raimund, poised to pummel them. Pons Benet saw this and didn't hesitate. With his eyes, he signaled to the 3 brutes beside him, ordering them to charge. The 3 thugs immediately rushed at Lumion and pulled out short sticks, iron rods, and other weapons. Lumion sped up too. Just as he was about to collide with the 3 thugs, he abruptly leapt at one of the enemies. This unorthodox move caused the 3 thugs' attacks to miss. Lumion grabbed the target's shoulder and did a somersault. His back seemed to flex like a spring, helping him grab the enemy and build up enough force for the roll. In an agile, exaggerated forward somersault, Lumion hurled the enemy and smashed him into the ground. Bang! The thug's vision darkened. His whole body ached, and he couldn't rise for a moment. At that instant, Lumion landed behind the other 2, only 7 or 8 steps from Pons Benet. He crouched slightly and charged at the villain. As Pons Benet frantically dodged, he shouted, "Quick, quick! Stop him!" The remaining 2 thugs hastily turned and chased after Lumion. Pons Benet composed himself and brazenly charged at the bastard, preparing to stall him before they surrounded him. Just as the 2 thugs were about to catch up to Lumion, who had deliberately not run at full speed, suddenly stopped and squatted. Amid grinding sounds, not only did the 2 thugs fail to hit their target's back, but because they couldn't halt in time, they lost their balance and collided with Pons Benet. Lumion pounced like a tiger and grabbed the 2 thugs' necks. He lifted their bodies and smashed their heads together. Bang! The 2 thugs' foreheads instantly swelled, and they fainted on the spot. Immediately after, Lumion tossed away the burden and exerted strength with his feet. He twisted his body and slid behind Pons, who had just risen. He grabbed the other party's arms and bent them backward. With a cracking sound, Pons Benet let out an extremely pained scream. "How is it? Does it feel good?" Lumion asked Pons Benet with a smile as he hoisted him and marched out of the village. Before long, he arrived beside the river, grabbed the back of Pons Benet's head, and forced him underwater. As bubbles surfaced, Lumion lifted Pons Benet's head, turned his face, and asked with a smile, "Does it feel good to bully others?" Pons Benet's face was soaked, and he looked to be in extreme agony. Snot and saliva flowed out, making it impossible for him to answer. "Doesn't it feel great?" Lumion's voice suddenly intensified. He grabbed the villain's head and smashed his forehead into the water, hitting the cobblestones. Bright crimson liquid seeped out of the water. Pons Benet struggled uselessly with his legs, unable to lift his head. Gulp! Gulp! As time dragged on, his struggles weakened. Only then did Lumion haul him up. He thrust out his left hand and smacked Pons across the face. "I'm asking you, does it feel good to bully others?" Pure terror filled Pons's eyes. He didn't know how to respond. Just then, a figure ambled over to the riverside. It was the hooded shepherd Pierre Barry. He glanced at the pathetic Pons and gently told Lumion, "We're all from the same village. Enough. You want to kill him?" Lumion immediately released Pons's head and stood up. He grinned at Pierre Barry, replying, "I'll listen to you. Make sure this jerk doesn't bully others again." Without waiting for Pierre's response, Lumion strode past the shepherd into the village. On the second floor of Oel Tavern, in Ryan's room, Lumian relayed his sister's thoughts to the three official investigators. Ryan exchanged a look with Leah and Valentine and nodded. Smart thinking. In a situation like this, spreading ourselves too thin just makes us an easy target. We can move into your house now. As they headed to Lumian and Aurora's house with her luggage, Leah asked Lumian amidst her tinkling sounds, "So what's the plan for the tomb?" "The plan?" Lumian snorted. "You think we can just waltz in there?" Leah smiled, relieved. "Good, you're still being cautious." Ryan chimed in. "What we mean is if whatever's in that tomb really leads to the cycle's key, it'll show up during the 12th night ritual. And if it's got nothing to do with the source of the cycle, why take the risk going in?" "In short," Lumian said, catching on, "we just wait patiently for the 12th night?" Ryan nodded at Lumian's confirmation. "You can interpret it that way. But if there are any other abnormalities worth investigating, we can't ignore them." "All right." Lumian actually shared the same thought. He hadn't even planned on participating in Lent, just in case he couldn't resist attacking when he saw the performance at the celebration. The four of them rapidly reached Lumian's residence, where Aurora led them to the second floor. Now dressed in a pure white cotton dress that accentuated her down-to-earth charm, Aurora pointed to Lumian's bedroom and study, offering the three official investigators a choice. "You can choose either room." Ryan glanced at Leah, seeking her opinion. After pondering for a few seconds, Leah raised her right hand, pointed at the study with a smile, and said, "That recliner looks pretty good. I could sleep there." "Ryan, bunk in that room with Valentine." While Aurora had the same question in mind, Lumian asked, "You trust us that much?" He assumed the three foreigners would opt to sleep in the same room on the floor, fearing an attack if they were separated. Leah grinned and answered Lumian's half-mocking, half-doubtful query. "My divination tells me the two of you can be trusted." As she spoke, she walked into the study, accompanied by tinkling sounds. She lay on the recliner, with a contented expression. Aurora found Leah intriguing and approachable. She smiled and advised, "A friend once told me that you can believe in divination, but not blindly. Divination is not all-powerful. My mentor said something similar, but we're all in the same situation. If I don't trust it, what else can we do?" Leah replied with a grin, snuggling into the recliner. Aurora didn't mind relinquishing her favorite seat. She pulled over a chair and sat down. Their study also served as a small living room. It occasionally hosted afternoon tea parties, so there was ample space and chairs. Ryan surveyed the corridor briefly before returning to the study. He said to Aurora and Lumian, "I have some suggestions. Please go ahead." Aurora politely assumed an attentive posture. Ryan nodded and offered, "First, when you sleep at night, don't close any doors. Let everyone be in the same space. This way, no matter where an abnormality occurs, we can react promptly. Second, considering we've destroyed the altar, someone might attempt to deal with us before Lent. Starting tonight, everyone will take turns on night duty. Yes, from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning, 2 hours per person." "How professional," Aurora muttered almost silently. Lumian glanced at her, as if asking why she hadn't thought of it. Aurora spread her hands slightly, signaling her lack of experience in team operations. She then turned to Ryan and Valentine, stating confidently, "Lumian will cover the period between 10 p.m. and midnight." Leah and the others didn't object to this arrangement. From their perspective, it made sense. Among the five present, Lumian had the lowest sequence and least experience. He was most prone to mistakes on night duty, but from 10 p.m. to midnight, others would still be awake to cover for him. NOV/L/B/JNN. Lumian knew his sister's intentions extended beyond this. He had to explore the dream ruins undisturbed after falling asleep. After finalizing the first schedule, Valentine volunteered, "I'm used to sleeping and waking early. I'll take the 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. slot. You get up early to welcome the sunrise." Lumian teased instinctively. Valentine's gaze on him softened. "Yes, I want to greet the rising sun and praise the light." His eyes seemed to say, "As expected, only a devout believer of the eternal blazing sun understands me." "Hey, I'm mocking you, brother." Lumian felt slightly defeated by Valentine. In the eternal blazing sun church, brother was a term used among believers. The two mainstream organizations within it, the Order of Preachers and the Brotherhood Minor, employed the term. I'm not used to being woken up mid-sleep, Leah chimed in. I'll take the midnight to 2 a.m. slot. Aurora nodded. I like to wake up late. I can take 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. And don't wake me for breakfast tomorrow. I'll get up around noon. Leave the rest to me. Ryan claimed the worst period with satisfaction. He also entered the study and found a chair to sit on. A conversation flowed effortlessly. Aurora, though seldom venturing out, possessed a wealth of knowledge spanning from astronomy to geography. She had her finger on the pulse of the latest trends, scandals, and supernatural events in metropolises like Trier and Backlund. This left Leah, Ryan, and the others secretly in awe of her. As expected of the renowned author, Aurora Leigh, Leah couldn't help but exclaim, "No wonder you can tackle any theme." Aurora inquired with genuine curiosity, "Have you read my novels?" Leah's eyes sparkled as she replied with a smile, "I've been reading your first novel since I was a young girl. By the way, I'd love your autograph." As she searched for papers and fountain pens, the silver bells on her veil and boots jingled. "Are those sealed artifacts?" Having heard Lumion mention Leah's performance with the 4 bells, Aurora couldn't resist asking. Leah produced a stack of post-it notes and a fountain pen, casually responding, "Yes, they can proactively warn me and enhance my divination abilities. The downside is they're rather noisy and not exactly discreet. Plus, the wearer must dress fashionably, with a dress being mandatory. It has to look good, or it'll be not only useless, but also potentially misleading or even dangerous." Aurora chuckled. "I can't decide if these bells were originally a man or a woman." Lumion agreed. If they were from a woman, it was a remnant of her vanity. If a man, he was undoubtedly a pervert. Leah offered a faint smile. "That involves some confidentiality, so I can't say any more." She stood up, handing Aurora a post-it note and the fountain pen. Aurora signed and asked, "Which genre of my novels do you prefer?" "Romance," Leah replied without hesitation. "Your first novel, Eternal Love, left a deep impression on me. I wrote that book too early," Aurora admitted with a hint of embarrassment. "I was young, and my writing skills were unpolished. I lacked experience. Many scenes felt rigid, and much of the dialogue was overly emotional and unrealistic." Lumion chimed in, "But it's sincere and original." Having read his sister's novel, he knew it dealt with a couple's separation through life and death, interwoven with adventure, misunderstandings, and terminal illness. It was a trailblazing piece in the Intis literary world. Naturally, this drew criticism from conservative authors and critics. They echoed Aurora's self-assessment and claimed it couldn't qualify as literature, deeming it a mere pedestrian novel. "That's right," Leah agreed, retrieving the paper and pen. She looked at Aurora and asked with a smile, "Ms. Author, would you consider becoming our informant at Bureau 8? Seeing Aurora's surprise, she continued, "Our primary objective in targeting wild beyonders is that they're unpredictable and may lose control or cause disaster at any moment. Otherwise, they can use their beyonder powers for all sorts of malicious purposes to satisfy their desires. Over the past few days in the village, I've carefully observed both of you and confirmed that you're orderly beyonders. Prior to arriving in Cordu, the information we gathered indicated that you haven't committed any wrongdoing on the surface. This meets our recruitment standards. Moreover, once you become our informants, you won't need to worry about being targeted by official beyonders." Aurora found the proposition enticing. She glanced at Lumion and gave a slight nod. "I'll think about it. I'll give you my answer when the cycle is over." Lumion immediately understood why his sister had looked his way. "I don't have a problem, but will a heavily corrupted guy like you bomb the test?" After chatting briefly, the siblings bid adieu to Leah and the others and headed back to Aurora's room. Aurora perched on the edge of the bed and glanced at the door. She hushed her voice and muttered, "Leah's socially adept." "What do you mean?" Lumion also sensed Leah had made the vibe harmonious in the study. Aurora smiled and said, "She took the initiative to bring up my novel and asked for my autograph to bond with me, so she could pitch recruiting me. The recruiting was to fix the distrust and barriers we have, easing teamwork the next few days. The whole process seemed natural not off-putting or wary. That's a sign of high EQ. You should follow her lead. Lumion remembered the chat and said self-deprecatingly, if it were me, I might have been booted by now. Amused, Aurora leaned back and said, at least you know yourself. She ruffled her blonde hair and said, I'll nap a bit. My eyes haven't fully healed, so I need more rest. Rouse me at 10, and I'll keep watch over you. It's your first night shift, so better safe than sorry. Lumion didn't object and agreed instantly. He watched his sister lie on the bed unhesitatingly, pull the blanket over her, and close her eyes. The room instantly turned eerily silent. Lumion quietly switched off the electric lamp and drew the curtains. Then, he sat on the chair by the desk and quietly watched his sister sleeping peacefully under the crimson moonlight. His heart gradually calmed down. The wind outside rustled, almost silent. Lumion allowed his thoughts to wander in this tranquil state as instinctive questions ran through his mind. There's still light in the corridor. Leah must be awake still, reading Aurora's book collection. Pitch darkness blankets my bedroom. Valentine should be resting in bed. I wonder what Ryan's up to. Haha, they didn't bring any alcohol on their first visit. They've no clue about Deri's customs. If the cycle lifts, Grande Sir can turn informant for Bureau 8. When the time comes, she won't fret over any investigation if she goes to try her. As for me, I needn't undergo any special tests as an informant, right? Now we've a full theory of the whole affair. The sole thing we can't be sure of is the owl, and the dead warlock in the tomb's role. If they bewitched the Padre and company, causing the abnormality to achieve some goal with the 12th night ritual, why did they do nothing but monitor my progress exploring the dream ruins? Could it be that, like Madame Puali's, they await a specific time, or the ritual on the 12th night, intending to complete the disrupted part? Is that why they want no changes to the loop, restarting it ahead of time? Their actions in turn prove the key to the loop lies with me. That's why they repeatedly try to confirm how far I've explored the dream ruins. If I unlock the dream's secret before the 12th night comes and master recycling the corruption, will they ignore the possibility of the cycle restarting ahead of time and attack me to hold me in custody? Yes, it's very likely they still have their memories. As all sorts of thoughts raced through his mind, Lumion suddenly heard faint commotion. Bah! It was a sheep's bleat, as if from afar. Lumion instantly thought of the 3 people turned sheep and Shepherd Pierre Barry. Don't tell me he really wants to attack us dead of night? Lumion stood up and listened intently. Outside the window was but the wind's sound through leaves and branches. No bleeding. It seemed Lumion, so engrossed in his thoughts, was hallucinating. But he didn't think so because he felt slight heat in his left chest. The black thorn symbol seemed to have appeared again. This meant an invisible force closely tied to the hidden existence had quietly invaded the room. Lumion had no time to think. He rushed to the bed and shook Aurora. Wake up! Wake up! He shouted in a hushed voice. He instinctively worried Leah, Ryan and Valentine would sense something amiss with him. Aurora opened her eyes, her light blue eyes clearly dazed. What time is it? She asked in a weak voice. Obviously she was still not fully awake. There's a situation, Lumion said decisively before continuing. 9:30. They were one of the few families in the village with wall clocks. Aurora's eyes snapped open. She bolted upright, threw out her right hand and massaged her temples. She had no time to consider what she might see that she shouldn't. If she couldn't pinpoint the anomaly and confirm the problem as soon as possible, she might not have to worry about seeing anything again. The dead had no need for eyes. Aurora scanned the room, her gaze darkening as if reflecting strange, indescribable lights and shadows. Lumion seized the chance to tell his sister about the sheep's bleat he'd heard in the distance, and the triggered heat in the black thorn symbol on his chest. Aurora frowned. But I didn't detect anything. The burning in my chest remains, Lumion rumbled. He felt inexplicably terrified. The darkness around him was not simple. An indescribable danger lurked. Aurora scrutinized every corner of the room, trying to find the unknown. Silently, Lumion broke into a cold sweat, a stark contrast to the searing heat in his left chest. He deliberated for a moment and said, why not tell Ryan and the others? Maybe they can find something. Aurora pondered, then nodded. Use your sudden sense of impending danger as an excuse. Right. Lumion opened his mouth, about to yell outside, then froze. What is it? Aurora asked, alarmed. Lumion frowned. The heat in my chest is dimming fast, meaning the blackthorn symbol was fading rapidly. The danger invading our room has left. Aurora mused. Because we prepared, it did nothing? Perhaps. Lumion turned to the corridor and bellowed. Something's wrong. Ryan appeared in the doorway in the blink of an eye, followed by Leah, then Valentine, who looked jolted from sleep. Without waiting to be asked, Lumion recounted what had happened, using his sense of danger in place of the burning in his chest. Ryan listened intently, not doubting this was Lumion's hallucination. He sighed. It's useful indeed to take turns on night watch. Mostly it's boredom, but if it saves everyone, it's almost life and death. As he spoke, he conjured pure sunrise gleam around him, circling every room on the second floor. Though he couldn't find the sinister power, he could at least sanctify the environment. Leah paced around, muttering under her breath. Her veil and boots jangled ominously, then fell silent just as abruptly. Finally, she said to Aurora and Lumion, "It was dicey just now. On top of that, whatever it was could block my sealed artifact from giving me any warning. I'm afraid these stupid bells will only go off once that thing really starts targeting someone. But now it has left. Well, that's reassuring." Aurora sighed in relief. Maybe it wasn't a single creature. Lumion relaxed and grinned. Could have been more than one. Ryan and the others were silent. That's even worse. Aurora lashed out at Lumion and told the investigators, "Now that the alarm's off, let's get back to our schedule." She didn't mention who might have snuck in to attack them. There were too many possibilities. Shepherd Pierre Barry, the unknown corpse in the tomb, or the shady deputy padre. Without solid clues, speculating would just waste time. Better to wait until daylight. For now, they just had to remember that nighttime held real danger. Someone was out to get them, so they'd need to stay on high alert. Once Leah and the others had gone to their rooms, Lumion glanced at the wall clock and asked Aurora, "Want to sleep in a bit more?" "No way. Waking up and crashing this late sucks." Aurora stretched her arms overhead. "Ugh, just to handle emergencies. I got this dress with pockets for spell components and useful stuff. I didn't even dare roll over, scared I might stab myself. I slept like a board." As she spoke, she hopped off the bed and strode to the window. She yanked back the curtains and peered outside. Corda was silent. Many houses were still lit up. "I thought that owl would come after us for sure, but there's no sign of it out there." Aurora surveyed the area and explained to Lumion. Lumion nodded. "That was my guess too." He then leaned in and whispered everything he had figured out to his sister. "Not bad," Aurora said with a smile. "You're getting better at analyzing situations." "I've got nothing to add." She paused. "But we can't take matters into our own hands. That tomb is too dangerous." At this point she exclaimed, "At dawn, we'll pay Madame Pualis a visit and tell her your theory. Let her know the warlock's and owl's motives might affect her escape from this time loop at that precise moment." "I'll go myself," Lumion said. He didn't want Aurora anywhere near Madame Pualis, who had designs on her. Aurora didn't argue. She only reminded him, "Watch your back. Don't piss her off or else." She eyed his abdomen meaningfully. Aurora sighed and said, "Truth is, that mysterious lady at OL Tavern is clearly stronger. But she wants nothing to do with this time loop. No way she'll help us investigate that tomb." "Yeah," Lumion agreed. He then said, "Still, I'll drop by OL Tavern tomorrow to see if I can run into her. What if she changes her mind?" "Fair enough." Aurora didn't object. They chatted in hushed tones until midnight. After Lumion relieving his post with Leah in the study, he returned to Aurora's room. He lay beside his sister, inhaling her familiar scent and sinking into the soft mattress. Sleep eluded him. "What's wrong?" Aurora asked, noticing his tenseness. "Just not used to this," Lumion said carefully. Aurora scoffed. "What happened to the bold Lumion I know?" Lumion didn't reply. Aurora exhaled slowly and smiled. "Remember when you first started tailing me? You were scared I'd slip away and refused to sleep at night. You were super vigilant." "Yeah, I do." Lumion drifted into the past. "Back then, you'd hum me a lullaby and let me doze off to the sound of your voice." As soon as the words left his lips, a familiar melody reached his ears. Light and soothing, it calmed his body and mind. NOVLB //JNN. Leaning against the bed, Aurora gazed into the deep crimson dark before her. She hummed the lullaby from her hometown, soft and wistful. It was a song their mother had crooned when Aurora was just a kid, coaxing her to sleep. Go to sleep, go to sleep. Lost in the gentle tune, Lumion gradually unwound and slipped under. Lumion woke up amidst the faint gray fog. He scoped the room and realized that he wasn't in his sister's room. He was still in his own room. Indeed, no matter where I fall asleep, I'll wake up here. Lumion tumbled out of bed and glimpsed at the fate-appropriated dirk beside him. No fallen Mercury. He paced to the window in the faint gray fog. He planted his hands on the desk and cast his gaze at the blood-colored peak. At the summit of the mountain, the fog was dense and stratified, utterly masking the three-headed, six-armed colossus. I nearly lost control with just a glance the last time. I really have no idea what to do if I have to face it in the future. Lumion sighed in frustration. He didn't sink into such emotions for long, and quickly broke free, because he still had numerous things to do. Lumion contorted himself into a deranged dance within his bedroom, emitting a distorted spiritual pulse. Combined with the stirred forces of nature, he'd broadcasted himself in an unspecific direction. NOVLB //JNN. Before long, he sensed approaching entities and saw the translucent forms of the mouth orifice monster, the shotgun monster, and the skinless monster reflected in his glass window. Lumion was in no hurry. Following his dance, he withdrew a ritual silver dagger and stabbed the back of his left hand. A droplet of crimson swiftly surfaced and congealed into a bead atop his skin, guided by his spirituality and the forces of nature. The trio of creatures shifted, but did not dare enter Lumion's abode or attach themselves to him. Lumion spun around, elevated his left hand and bellowed, "Eyes!" Shouting in the ancient tongue of Hermes, it caused the room to rock faintly. Employing his ritual dagger, Lumion collected the droplet of blood and aimed it at the mouth orifice beast. "I command you, onto me!" Again in ancient Hermes. An imperceptible gust blew. The translucent form of the mouth orifice monster trembled visibly, as if seized and vigorously shaken by an invisible entity. Just as Lumion completed his dance, believing it would have no effect, the mouth orifice monster hurtled into the house and landed upon the ritual silver dagger, devouring the droplet of crimson. It then convulsed violently as it tunneled into Lumion's body through the silver dagger. Lumion could not help but gasp, his mind flooded with thoughts of so hungry, starving, starving. He hastily turned and stared at the full-length mirror on his wardrobe. He saw his visage was pallid and tinged cerulean. His maw gaped wildly, resembling a cadaver more than a living being. Success! Lumion exulted, gazing at his reflection, as if regarding a stranger. It felt somewhat alien. He resisted his intense hunger and attempted to sense the mouth orifice monster possessing him. It was like acquiring an additional brain. Much of it brimmed with hunger, bloodlust, madness, and more. Instinctively, he had a proclivity to harness its characteristics. Lumion could utilize his will and spirituality to magnify one of those instincts. It equated to employing the mouth orifice monster's traits or abilities. Without a second thought, Lumion chose invisibility. In the blink of an eye, his reflection vanished from the full-length mirror. Everything from his body to his clothes, to the ritual silver dagger had disappeared. Lumion took a few steps forward and back, but he couldn't spot any traces of himself in the mirror or glass. Of course, his footprints and scent remained. Lumion stuffed the silver dagger Aurora had given him, raised his arms, and punched the air a few times. With each whooshing punch, the full-body mirror stayed empty until Lumion swung a fist at its surface. The moment his knuckles connected with the mirror, his outline materialized. His face was pale with a tinge of blue, and his eyes glinted dangerously. Unbelievable. No matter what I do, the invisibility stays on. But I can't mute it. However, as long as I attack the mirror, I lose invisibility. I thought it was optical invisibility like Aurora said, but it seems to be a result of mysticism. Attacking something forms a bond with it, rendering me invisible to its gaze. Lumion hovered his right fist over the mirror. After verifying the effects and limits of invisibility, ravenous hunger overwhelmed him. He stomped downstairs into the cellar and found 2 steaks. If not for his rationality, he would have sunk his teeth into the dark meat. Lumion abandoned the ingredients and grabbed the cheese he had stockpiled, realizing he had to fry the steak medium rare with no fire set up. He didn't care if it was clean or delectable. Like a ghost starved to death, he shoved food into his mouth. After eating a few cheese slices, Lumion finally satiated his intense hunger. Looks like this is the downside of the mouth orifice monster, he evaluated seriously. Luckily, I can still control my body and haven't lost my mind. That thing is obsessed with revenge, but overpowered by even greater fear. If I utter believe in ancient Hermes now, it'll bolt faster than anything. By now, Lumion was sure the mouth orifice monster's possession had acceptable side effects. Invisibility would become a potent weapon to explore and battle in the dream ruins. Coupled with fallen mercury, he felt his combat ability had more than doubled. Lumion returned to the dining table, pulled out a chair, and sat down, patiently awaiting the possession's end. Soon his spirituality nearly depleted. He didn't strain himself. He stood up and performed some seemingly insane moves. It was the same dance to attract monsters. Its purpose was to force the possessing creature out. Without Lumion's command in ancient Hermes, the mouth orifice monster's blurry and translucent figure flew out and vanished through the glass window on the first floor without glancing back. Lumion couldn't help but make a self-deprecating remark. "Don't run so fast. You're acting like I have a cesspit on me." He knew he could maintain possession for about 3 minutes given his spirituality. Once invisible, his consumption rate would double. Of course, that was under normal circumstances. In danger, he could strain himself to last longer. But that risked losing control, best avoided if possible. Though the mouth orifice monster had left, Lumion still felt ravenous. He lit the stove and fried the steak medium well. Then he picked up his knife and fork and quickly forked it, and put it into his mouth. He felt that the juice locked in the meat was delicious. Lumion devoured 2 steaks in under 10 minutes, sating his hunger. Looking at the empty plate, he sighed. 3 minutes of possession needs at least 2 hours to recover. This didn't only mean eradicating hunger, but a recovery of spirituality too. Lumion knew his current state wasn't fit for exploring. He found flour, sugar and other bits, using the oven at home to bake biscuits. With cheese, this would be his main source of fuel in the ruins. Had he more time, he'd have gotten jerky too, food shepherds often carried. As a quarter resident, he knew how to make them. Busy with this, Lumion pondered his dream ruin plans. First, circle the city wall. Then hunt that flaming beast. Only by amping up my strength can I better explore and unravel the secrets of the dream. The flaming monster's strength was at least sequence 7, and there was a high chance it was from the hunter pathway. Its various abilities perfectly squashed Lumion. He hadn't planned on dealing with that dude anytime soon, hoping to first seek out prey that was weaker and on par with the provoker. But now, scoring fallen mercury and invisibility gave him a certain level of hope. When his spirituality had mostly recovered, Lumion placed the baked biscuits and sliced cheese into a cloth pouch and slung it around his waist. Then he seriously wrapped his left hand in layers of white bandages and grabbed the evil dirt called fallen mercury. Hauling his shotgun and axe, Lumion strode towards the door on the first floor with the other stuff he needed. Suddenly, he had the feeling that he was a fully armed hunter preparing for a dangerous hunt. Many thoughts surfaced in his mind. My first move is to track the flaming monster's movements. Then I'll use invisibility to sneak up on it and stab it with fallen mercury. Before that, I'll hunt a weak monster and steal its bad fate. Then swap that fate with the flaming monsters. I can't do the sacrificial dance while possessed and half-activate the black thorn symbol. Otherwise, the mouth orifice monster will bolt from my body immediately. So, how do I get away from the flaming monster after hurting it and wait for the fate swap to finish? It'll easily lock onto me through my traces. Invisibility alone won't cut it. Lumion hadn't figured out the last part yet. That depended on early intel. As he opened the door and went into the wilderness, he had an odd feeling. If I can successfully hunt the flaming monster, my hunter potion will be fully digested. In the area where he'd met the flaming monster before, Lumion held his pewter-black dirk in his left hand. He carefully searched for any traces, on high alert for sudden attacks. After circling cautiously for nearly 10 minutes, he finally found signs of the flaming monster. In a collapsed house's corner, there were black scorch marks on a stone unlike any around it. Where there's one, there's two. Lumion quickly tracked the flaming monster's location and slowly, cautiously followed its trail. When the marks were fresh, he stopped and began to dance. Lumion danced to lure in strange creatures. His objective? To use invisibility to slip closer and analyze the flaming monster's habits and movements, gathering intel for future hunts. Within a mere 30 to 40 seconds, he used ancient Hermes to reattach the mouth orifice creature to himself. An overwhelming hunger consumed Lumion, compelling him to open his mouth. It was as if his mouth had sprouted vortex-shaped teeth. Swiftly, he stifled the ravenous and insane thoughts flooding his being, pulled out a small biscuit and a cube of cheese, and shoved them into his mouth, chewing and swallowing. Simultaneously, he strengthened the mouth orifice creature's invisibility, causing him to vanish from sight. Having quelled his hunger, Lumion tried hard to clamp his mouth shut to prevent the aroma of biscuit and cheese from escaping. He then trailed the flaming monster along the road's edge. Before long, Lumion spotted the charred monster, its every limb ablaze. It was constructing a new trap in the clearing from before. "You're already a monster, yet you're still so dedicated?" Lumion silently jeered. Naturally, he understood this was merely an expression of the monster's instinctive behavior. Lumion dared not approach too closely, halting beside a crumbling wall at the clearing's perimeter. He studied the flaming monster for a few moments before glancing back at the path he had traversed. He noticed that, although his footprints were faint and concealed in less conspicuous areas, they still existed. Lumion eyed his current position and hatched a plan. Closely monitoring the monster's movements, he seized a larger rock and hurled it to the side. As it flew, he pressed his right hand against the decaying wall and vaulted up, landing securely atop the wall. Crash! Lumion's actions were flawlessly masked by the sound of the rock striking the ground. After changing his vantage point, Lumion felt much more at ease. Monitoring his dwindling spirituality, he intently observed the flaming monster. He discerned that the flaming monster's traps were neither concealed nor challenging to detect. They didn't exploit any logical vulnerabilities or inertia-driven movement. They were simple and exposed. The most elementary example was the flaming monster, stretching a rope slightly above one's ankle between two ruined buildings across the clearing. Any human or monster with normal vision could easily discover this trap. At first, Lumion didn't grasp its purpose, but after placing himself in the monster's position, he gradually discerned its potential significance. The intent of such traps was not to directly harm or ensnare enemies, but to forge an environment that enabled hunters to exhibit their full potential. In the heat of battle, one struggled to observe the environment and maintain situational awareness. Constantly distracted by these limitations, they occasionally had to slow down or alter their stance to evade traps. Hunters possessed the unique ability to remain alert to their surroundings at all times and exploit the environment to their advantage. This disparity widened the gulf between their strengths. An open conspiracy. Lumion nodded in understanding, recalling Aurora's words. Suddenly, he perceived the flaming monster as a stern instructor imparting valuable lessons about hunters to him. Simultaneously, he remembered the content of Aurora's novel. Stealing from a master is punishable by death. Eventually, the flaming monster ceased its activity. Its charred face instinctively scanned the vicinity. Then it strode towards the edge of the clearing near Lumion, flames dancing from its body. Following a predetermined route to the next location, Lumion mused to himself, his excitement mounting. For hunters, discerning a quarry's path was invaluable. Most traps lay hidden along such routes. As the flaming monster ambled, it scrutinized its surroundings and examined the ground, remaining vigilant. This caused Lumion to furrow his brow. He realized that a higher sequence hunter wouldn't be easily handled. The most effective counter to Beyonders was often individuals or objects of a higher sequence from the same pathway. even if the gap was only 1 or 2 sequences. I'm better at your strengths than you are. You may lack what I possess. If not for his dancer-related abilities and the fallen Mercury dirk, Lumion wouldn't have dared to entertain any designs on the flaming monster. 7 to 8 seconds later, the flaming monster reached the edge of the clearing, approximately 5 to 6 meters from the crumbling wall. As before, the flaming monster's gaze instinctively roved. It paused, as if observing footprints near the wall's edge that appeared to have been left by someone. Thump thump. Lumion's heart pounded involuntarily. He wasn't prepared to hunt the flaming monster just yet. Despite the 5 to 6 meters between them, Lumion hesitated to kill the enemy with fallen Mercury, knowing the latter hadn't stored an exchangeable fate. If a fight erupted, he'd be hunted before he could activate the black thorn symbol. Lumion struggled to control his heartbeat and breathing. His right hand hovered over the black cloth covering fallen Mercury's blade, ready to tear it away at any moment. If he leaped with full force from his current position, he might reach the flaming monster and avoid a long-range battle that favored his opponent. 2 or 3 seconds ticked by. The flaming monster averted its gaze and moved on. It didn't seem to have noticed Lumion's footprints. After covering another 10 meters, the flaming monster suddenly spun around. Flames erupted from its body, condensing into a massive, searing white fireball. The fireball rocketed like a cannonball toward the spot where Lumion had been perched at the edge of the crumbling wall. N/O/vel/b/n.c//om. Following his instincts, Lumion, who was crouching on the wall, leaped down to the other side, where the flaming monster had laid its trap. Boom! A fiery blast erupted, causing the already unstable wall to collapse. Upon landing, Lumion rolled twice to avoid falling debris and the shockwave laced with flames. He immediately sprang back up, maintaining his invisibility as he sped through the traps left by the flaming monster and headed toward another exit in the clearing. The flaming monster couldn't detect its enemy right away, so it focused on searching for clues. Finally, it spotted a series of faint footprints. By then, Lumion had reached the rope stretched between 2 collapsed buildings, easily jumping over it and fleeing the clearing. He dashed to a natural trap and shook off his pursuer. Having deactivated his invisibility, Lumion cursed in pain. Too treacherous, too treacherous. One of these monsters' heads is worth 2 of Ponza's. After finding my footprints, it pretended not to see them and deliberately increased the distance between us, fearing it might be defeated. As Lumion cursed, he felt like he had learned something new. Of course, there were drawbacks to this approach. The increased distance gave Lumion room to escape. Furthermore, his invisibility meant the flaming monster couldn't lock onto him right away. His chances of escaping were high. After catching his breath and restoring some energy, Lumion mused while eating biscuits and cheese. Based on what just happened, as long as I plan carefully and strike at the right moment, I can rely on invisibility to create distance and escape to a safe location, waiting for the fate exchange to complete. Lumion's invisibility would break upon attacking, but as long as he avoided contact, he could use it again. This valuable insight emerged from his reconnaissance. However, he also realized a problem. As a hunter, I didn't bring water when I went hunting in the mountains. I'm so thirsty. Both cheese and biscuits required water. The jerky Lumion intended to make in the future fell into this category too. After resting briefly, he resolved to hunt Noodle Man, strip its bad fate, and store it in fallen Mercury. He couldn't risk being defenseless in an emergency again. A puppet's fate also belonged to fallen Mercury and could be exchanged. But Lumion wasn't a wielder. He couldn't swap his fate with others. If he could, he'd gladly give away the bomb on him. About 30 minutes later, Lumion tracked down Noodle Man, the grotesque hodgepodge of limbs and features. Having completed the ritualistic dance in advance, Lumion strode towards Noodle Man openly. As expected, he found Noodle Man prostrate on the fetid ground, trembling uncontrollably. Very obedient, Lumion praised, gripping an iron-black axe in his right hand, and the pewter-black fallen Mercury dirk in his left. Though fallen Mercury dirk's malignant aura seeped into Lumion's skin, even without contact, he had long grown immune to its corrupting influence. What might drive ordinary beyonders to losing control was nothing to him. Lumion glowered at the pathetic noodle man cowering before him, retracting his gaze from the gnashing maw on its forehead. According to Aurora, death is a mercy for your kind. The sooner you expire, the sooner your suffering will end. As he spoke, Lumion crouched and plunged the pewter-black dirk deep into the back of Noodle Man's neck. Noodle Man spasmed, but did not resist or struggle. Lumion wrenched the dirk free and gripped his axe, swinging the weapon down with fluid grace. The axe head cleaved through flesh and bone, sending Noodle Man's head tumbling across the ground with fallen Mercury's swipe. Blood erupted from the severed neck, splattering everywhere. Noodle Man's twitching remains soon fell still, lifeless at last. Lumion strode over to the head and retrieved fallen Mercury with his left hand. In the fleeting second between breaths, an illusory river shimmered before his eyes. The river appeared to be constructed from intricate Mercury symbols, and each symbol seemed formed by the river itself. At once, the river's branches disappeared, leaving only the primary current. It fractured midway and kinked as if wanting to double back to its source, but for now could not prevail. Lumion couldn't grasp the meaning of the illusory river he saw or sensed. All he could surmise was that it symbolized fate. Guided by fallen Mercury's instincts, he lifted the blade's tip and aimed it at a Mercury symbol within the river. As soon as he made contact with the Mercury River, a series of scenes flashed through Lumion's mind. Noodle Man performing an enigmatic sacrificial dance. Noodle Man cowering before the black-thorn symbol and prostrating itself. Noodle Man gathering the scattered flesh and blood throughout the dream ruins to satiate its hunger. Noodle Man attempting to approach the city walled circle, but retreating each time as if afraid of something. Noodle Man's head severed by an axe. Is this its entire existence since the loop began? Lumion realized this as he tried to stab the tip of fallen Mercury at the Mercury symbol representing Noodle Man's demise. The end of the illusory river. It was too immense and heavy for him to succeed. At that moment, the Mercury symbol started to dissipate, and the illusory river gradually faded. The images in Lumion's mind grew hazy. There's a time limit? Lumion didn't dare to dawdle. Adhering to the principle of proximity, he aimed the dark pewter dirk at Noodle Man's fate of succumbing to the blackthorn symbol. The Mercury symbol, seemingly formed by the river's entanglement, was pried open, condensing into a droplet that seeped into the blade of fallen Mercury. In the next instant, the illusory river vanished entirely, preventing Lumion from witnessing Noodle Man's fate again. He glanced down at fallen Mercury and noticed the heretic symbols on the pewter-black blade undulating gently like water, as though infused with some vital force. They had been mesmerizing from the start, but now they appeared even more sinister. Success, Lumion whispered to himself in relief. Fallen Mercury was now complete. In the future, as long as he could wound the flaming monster with this heretic dirk in battle, he could swap the monster's fate of cowering before the black thorn symbol with the former. Lumion wrapped the blade of fallen Mercury in black cloth and sheathed it in his belt. He dealt with Noodle Man's corpse briefly, moving it into a half-collapsed building. He destroyed the building's last support, allowing rubble and wood to fall, burying everything inside. After this, Lumion circled back to where the flaming monster had appeared. n/o/vel/b/jan.c//om. This time, he didn't approach for observation. Instead, he searched for footprints and other traces, taking time to identify which ones the target left while deliberately circling around. After nearly 2 hours, Lumion gradually deciphered the flaming monster's habits and patterns. A mental hunting map emerged. He spent some time surveying the predetermined battlefields, seeking natural traps to exploit. Eventually, Lumion rubbed his forehead and decided to delve deeper into the ruins while he still had energy, gathering information for future explorations. He remained vigilant and performed the sacrificial dance again, partially triggering the blackthorn symbol. With the amulet in hand, Lumion quickly followed the same path as before. He encountered monsters along the way, but they either fled before attacking or vanished from sight at a distance. The deeper he went, the more similar situations occurred. Finally, when the burning sensation in his chest from the second sacrificial dance subsided, Lumian spotted the city wall, composed of twisted houses once more. He rested a while, waiting for his spirituality to recover, before performing the sacrificial dance again. After the dance, sometimes forceful, sometimes graceful, Lumian headed in the direction where he found fallen Mercury, the black thorn symbol activated. After passing through the room where the flames had been extinguished, he slowed his pace, wary of a sudden assault. After walking a while, Lumian noticed the light ahead had dimmed considerably. It was as if a massive creature high in the sky blocked the light, or the sun was obscured by something. Lumian instinctively looked up, but saw only thick fog. Unable to determine the cause, he could only draw fallen Mercury and cautiously proceed. In a moment, it felt as if he had transitioned from day to night. Of course, this was an exaggeration. Lumian thought it more accurate to liken the foggy weather to a place shrouded in dark clouds. Almost simultaneously, he yawned involuntarily, his exhaustion intensifying. "No, I can't sleep." Lumian forced himself to keep his eyes open as he retreated from the shadowy base of the mountain. His mental state improved significantly. Although still tired, he could endure it. You fall asleep the moment you enter. The deeper you go, the sleepier you become? Lumian mused silently. He turned and walked in another direction. After another sacrificial dance, he arrived at an unfamiliar area. To his right were walls stacked with doors and windows. To his left lay a wasteland connected to the circle of building ruins, and ahead stood brown trees. In the desolate ruins, the trees seemed incredibly resilient. They intertwined and embraced each other, forming a wooden wall 5 to 6 meters tall. This wooden wall had numerous green leaves and branches, a stark contrast to the deathly silence and desolation surrounding it. If it hadn't blocked the path to the back of the city wall, Lumian might have praised its tenacious vitality. But now, he could only express his dissatisfaction with the crude gesture of raising 2 middle fingers. He could have chosen to take a detour and enter from the other side of the dream ruins. But he wasn't familiar with that area. His spirituality was nearly depleted, so there was no need to take the risk. Lumian yawned unabashedly, his chest still burning as he retraced his steps. As Lumian awoke, the first light of dawn had already crept through the thick curtains, casting an outline of the desk, chair, wardrobe, and other furnishings within the room. Still early, he thought, glancing over at Aurora beside him. Aurora's blonde hair lay strewn across the white pillow, her eyes closed in peaceful slumber. Her right hand gripped the edge of the blanket, occasionally attempting to turn over, but stopping instinctively. Her brow furrowed before gradually smoothing out. Lumian had a good idea why his sister reacted this way. She had hidden numerous bottles within her nightgown as a precaution. Sleeping on her side or stomach would undoubtedly cause her harm. How exhausting! Lumian sighed inwardly, his expression tender and his heart at ease. After a moment, he carefully slid out of bed and left the bedroom. He moved toward a side balcony that led to the rooftop. Facing the distant crimson sky, he stretched his body. Within a minute, Valentine emerged from his room and stood in the corridor. "Are you also greeting the sun?" he asked, his usual cold demeanor replaced with warmth and approval. "Can I say no?" Lumian smiled. "That's right." Satisfied, Valentine stepped onto the balcony and stood tall, facing the rising sun. He spread his arms wide, lifted his face toward the sky and whispered, "Praise the sun." With no other choice, Lumian mimicked the gesture. "Praise the sun." Valentine lowered his arms and crossed them over his chest. After a moment of silent prayer, he opened his eyes and said to Lumian, "If the loop is successfully resolved, I'll introduce you to the Bishop of Darij. Or would you prefer Bigor?" "I prefer Trier," Lumian answered, smiling. "But where I go isn't up to me. It's up to my sister." Valentine nodded and dropped the subject. He turned back toward the corridor and began patrolling. Nothing happened until 8 o'clock. The pair then went downstairs and prepared breakfast together. Soon after, Ryan joined them to help. Leah woke up just before 9, leaving Aurora still asleep. Ryan bit into his toast and asked Lumian, "Do you have any plans for today?" Lumian hesitated before responding, "We should leave someone at home. Aurora can't be left to face a potential attack alone. The remaining 2 will accompany me to stock up on food and fetch some water. We must hold out until the 12th night." Corda lacked a proper water supply. Aurora had installed a water tank on the roof during her renovations. As long as it was regularly filled and disinfected, it was as good as having running water. Yes, we need to do all this before Lent, Ryan agreed. Lumion smiled brightly. By the way, we should visit Madame Pualis and ask if she can help us investigate the dead warlock and the owl in the tomb. As expected, Valentine frowned and Ryan's smile stiffened. Leah sipped her water and offered a smile. I'll stay with Aurora. No problem. Lumion agreed on behalf of Ryan and Valentine. With no other choice, the two men acquiesced to visit the administrator's residence that morning. Following breakfast, the trio exited the semi-subterranean two-story building and made their way toward Oel Tavern. They passed Shepherd Pierre Barry's home along the way. Lumion's heart raced as he suggested to Ryan and Valentine, "Let's check on the 3 sheep." He recalled the bleating he had heard the night before. Understanding his meaning, Ryan and Valentine offered no objection. They circled around to the rear of the Barrys' home, only to find an empty sheep pen. The 3 sheep were gone. Gazing at the empty sheep pen littered with hay and dung, Ryan furrowed his brow and said, "Did they really fix the underground altar so quickly?" He suspected the 3 missing sheep had been taken for sacrifice. "Maybe these heretics have some special powers," Valentine replied with disdain. As Lumion listened to their conversation, he suddenly remembered the faint sound of a sheep's bleating he heard the night before. Could it have been one of the sheep being sacrificed? Puzzled, he shared his suspicion with Ryan and Valentine. "That seems unlikely," Ryan dismissed, shaking his head. "The cathedral is hundreds of meters from your house, and the altar is underground." What he meant was that even with a hunter's enhanced hearing, it would be impossible to hear anything from the cathedral's underground. Lumion shared that doubt, but couldn't explain why he heard the bleating. Simultaneously, a distinct burning sensation appeared in his chest as the black thorn symbol partially activated. There was no way to fake this. Burning sensation. Lumion's heart raced, recalling something the mysterious woman had said. "Pray to yourself, the principle of proximity." Thinking back to the ritual that invoked Dancer's power and the black thorn symbol, he formed a new hypothesis. He heard the sheep bleating during the sacrifice because of mysticism. In simpler terms, when the Padre and his group performed their ritual and prayed to the hidden being, the principle of proximity also targeted the corruption in Lumion's body, partially triggering the black thorn symbol. As a result, Lumion could faintly hear the sheep's cries from afar, him being unable to respond or knowing how. With the corruption now sealed by the owner of the bluish-black pattern, the Padre's ritual ultimately contacted the hidden entity. After the ritual, the burning sensation in Lumion's chest faded. "It seems no invisible, strange power had invaded Aurora's room last night. The anomaly in my body was just half activated by the Padre's ritual." Lumion roughly understood how events had unfolded. At that moment, Ryan warned his companions, "It appears our investigation of the cathedral's underground has alarmed the Padre and his people. They've found a way to repair the altar and pray for strength ahead of time. From now on, we need to be extra vigilant. Don't assume things will only turn dangerous as Lent approaches. If I weren't worried about restarting the loop, I'd have dealt with them already." Valentine spat hatefully. Then he added gloomily, "Can you stop calling that servant of the evil god a Padre? He's not worthy. Why was he a Padre if he wasn't worthy?" Lumion dared not voice his thoughts. He wasn't afraid to voice his thoughts, but wanting to maintain his image in Valentine's eyes, he kept silent. After all, he might need to persuade this fanatic to do something later, like using his suicide to verify the essence of the cycle. Ryan nodded. "Let's visit Madame Pualis as soon as possible to replenish our supplies. We should stay inside as much as we can in the future." Lumion said nothing more, leaving Shepherd Pierre Barry's house through the back door and heading towards the castle on the hill. Passing through the vibrant garden, the trio approached the partially open door and informed the red-coated, white-panted manservant, "We need to see Madame Pualis." "Wait a moment." The valet glanced at Ryan and Valentine before swiftly turning and vanishing through the door. Soon after, the pale-faced midwife in a grayish-white dress emerged. Compared to last time, her face was even paler, and her eyes were so blank that it made one's heart turn cold. Had Lumian not informed Ryan and Valentine beforehand that the midwife wasn't dead, they would have been shocked. They had seen plenty of dead people turn into zombies. The Solar High Priest specialized in such matters. Valentine had purified dozens of similar cases, but it was beyond their understanding how a person diced into pieces could revert to their original appearance and seem more alive than dead. The midwife spoke in a monotone. "Madam doesn't want to see you. Please leave. We have urgent matters," Lumian insisted. "Isn't Madame Pualis concerned that the person underground will disrupt her plans?" The midwife maintained her tone. "Madame says it won't affect her." Hearing this, a chill ran down Lumian's spine. It meant they would have a hard time getting Madame Pualis' help again. Lumian smiled without displaying frustration or disappointment. Looking at the midwife, he said, "But we might explore the tomb." He implied that during the exploration, either side could encounter trouble, triggering the loop to restart prematurely. Unfazed, the midwife remained stiff and blank. "You can try, but you'll only be disappointed." What does she mean? Lumian couldn't grasp Madame Pualis' message. Does she mean they could explore all they wanted, and she would offer some help at crucial moments, but they wouldn't find any valuable clues? The more Lumian pondered, the more he doubted that was her intended meaning. Otherwise, she wouldn't have refused their meeting request through the midwife. Before Lumian could consider other possibilities, Ryan thoughtfully asked, "Is Madame Pualis trying to tell us that the person in the tomb can easily control us and prevent our investigation without triggering the loop?" "Yes." The midwife nodded slowly, turned, and retreated deeper into the castle. Lumian, Valentine, and Ryan exchanged glances and left, feeling helpless. Their next stop was OL Tavern, where they could purchase plenty of provisions and barrels of cheap wine. Compared to potable water that spoiled easily, wine was more stable. As long as its alcohol content wasn't too high, it could substitute for water. Entering OL Tavern, Lumian scanned the room, but didn't spot the mysterious woman. Disappointed, he focused on the bar counter, telling tavern owner Maurice Benet what they needed. After Ryan and Valentine hauled out wine barrels, Lumian lowered his voice and inquired, "Where's the other lady?" Maurice Benet shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe she's in her room, somewhere else in the village, or even in Liège. She rented the room until the 9th. She's free to do as she pleases. n/o/vel/b/jan.c//om. The 9th? The 12th night?" Lumian nodded thoughtfully. April 9th was the so-called 12th night that he and Aurora had deduced. This also confirmed that March 29th was indeed the loop's first day. If Ryan and the two other foreigners hadn't happened to enter Cordu on a particular cycle's first day, the loop would immediately restart and commence on March 29th whenever outsiders invaded the area. "Damn." Lumian slapped his forehead and told the tavern owner, Maurice Benet, "My stomach's acting up. I need the restroom. Tell them to wait for me." Maurice Benet's expression seemed to say, "What are you up to now? Don't mess with me." The downside of having a bad reputation rears its ugly head once more. Lumian chuckled. "Don't worry. I'm really just using the restroom." As he spoke, he waved and sprinted toward the staircase. He did want to use the restroom, but he was heading for the one upstairs. Maurice Benet glanced at his retreating figure and muttered, "Spring is here, and this scoundrel's hormones are raging." His voice barely reached Lumian's ears. Upon reaching the second floor, Lumian approached the restroom and positioned himself in front of the mysterious lady's room. Knock, knock, knock. He rapped on the door. No answer. Noticing the absence of a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle, Lumian knocked twice more, each time louder than before. Unfortunately, the mysterious lady never showed. Lumian pondered for a moment before producing a slim wire and jiggling it in the keyhole. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room. The bed's blanket lay neatly folded, as though no one had occupied the space recently. Lumian exhaled quietly and closed the door without venturing inside. In the afternoon, the siblings congregated in Aurora's bedroom under the guise of instructing Lumian in the art of Hermes to swiftly enhance his strength. Lumian kept his voice low as he recounted his excursion into the dream ruins the previous night. At last he inquired, "Anything to add?" "About hunting the flaming monster." Though he was armed with fallen mercury and invisibility, his confidence in hunting the flaming beast remained low. It was a sequence of the hunter pathway that had experienced a qualitative transformation. Aurora chuckled. "You've covered all the bases. The only thing I can add is..." She lifted her hands, formed fists and shook them gently. "Break a leg." Lumion felt defeated by his sister's jest. However, the tension in his chest subsided. Aurora then said, "What remains are some cliched words. Be careful, be very careful." She sighed. "It's a shame the mysterious lady isn't here. Otherwise, I could have crafted some simple, supplementary talismans, along with the integrity brooch, and had them brought into your dream." "That's true." While Lumion felt disappointed, he wasn't disheartened. He had no intention of giving up. At 9:50 p.m., Lumion slid out of Aurora's bedroom and stalked down the hallway towards the washroom. He intended to relieve himself before beginning his night watch. Bathed in the crimson glow of the moon, the washroom was shrouded in darkness. Only the toilet was faintly visible. Lumion bent over and unfastened his belt. Behind him, the shadow on the wall abruptly writhed and morphed into a silhouette brandishing an axe high above its head. Lumion's eyes were narrowed, his body tensing as he sensed the pores on his skin open. An overwhelming premonition of danger washed over him. In the dream ruins, he'd had no shortage of similar experiences. Instantly, he halted and tumbled to the side, like a boneless sack of flesh. A whistling wind filled his ears as a razor-sharp axe grazed his body, slicing through the air. Lumion hit the ground with a thud, attempting to roll to his feet. But pale white and pitch black, eerie arms extended from the surrounding shadows, grabbing his clothes and coiling around his body. The cold sensation and stiffness seeped into Lumion's flesh. Twisting wildly, trying to escape the restraints with his powerful agility, he shouted, "Help!" Too malicious, bumpy palms smothered his mouth, stifling his voice abruptly, leaving only a whimper. Simultaneously, Lumion glimpsed an elongated humanoid shadow on the wall, raising the axe at him. Clang! A two-handed broadsword of pure light blocked the axe's slash. Ryan was the first to rush over, not bothering with his dawn armor, and simply summoned a sword of dawn. The shadowy axe took on a heavy, sharp, and dark appearance the moment it detached from the wall. The second person to arrive at the washroom door was Leah, who had been in the opposite study. The silver bells on her veil and boots tinkled softly. Leah raised her right palm and aimed her silver revolver at the strange arms grabbing Lumion. They tightened, as if trying to drag Lumion into the shadows. Blue blood vessels bulged from Lumion's neck, forehead, and hands, straining with all his might. Yet, he couldn't fend off the pale white and pitch black arms. His body dissolved into the shadows piece by piece. Bang! Leah fired, and a golden bullet wrapped in blazing flames struck a pitch-black arm that seemed to drip ink. The arm ignited, quickly releasing Lumion's neck and retreating into the shadowy corner. Aurora arrived at the washroom to find such a scene. Seeing a third of her brother's body thinned and darkened into a shadow, his expression growing increasingly rigid, Aurora wasted no time. She pulled iron-black materials from her hidden pocket and sprinkled the powder at Lumion, her light blue eyes darkening. Lumion felt an invisible hand grasp him and pull him toward Aurora. He recalled his sister using a similar spell before, but it had pushed him away. This time, she yanked him closer. The colossal hand's strength equaled that of the sinister arms, stopping Lumion's slide into the shadows. Clang! 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 Ryan drove the figure with the sharp axe back into the wall. The next second, Valentine appeared behind Leah and Aurora. Witnessing Lumion's state, he spread his arms wide. Golden illusory flames materialized around Lumion, incinerating countless wicked arms. The pitch-black or pale white arms either melted like candles or evaporated into black wisps of smoke. Within seconds, 4/5 of the strange arms grabbing Lumion vanished. The remaining arms struggled to resist the invisible hand and Lumion's efforts, releasing him one after another. Feeling the grip on him loosen, Lumion was pulled by the invisible hand, half flying and half pouncing toward Aurora. As the pitch-black and pale white arms retracted, the axe-wielding figure froze on the wall, merging with the surrounding shadows, leaving no trace. Lumion stood and surveyed the area, sneering. Is that it? Aren't you looking down on us by only sending one person? Aurora glared at him. Don't speak. How could he utter such ill-omened words at a time like this? As Aurora's voice echoed in the corridor, a black spiked vine, abnormally thick as if from the abyss, descended from the study ceiling. At its top bloomed a massive blood-red flower with a foul odor. The flower expanded, as if stretching its mouth to the limit. It suddenly engulfed Leah's head and writhed frantically. As it chewed, the object in its mouth turned into a thin piece of paper and was shredded. Immediately after, the radiant broadsword of light flew from the washroom, impaling the massive evil flower to the wall. Streams of bright red blood oozed from the sword, evaporating into mist. Simultaneously, tendrils of black vines cascaded from the ceiling of the Lumion residence, enveloping the walls and sealing the windows with enormous red blossoms. Aurora swiftly produced a pearl-like powder and tossed it into the air, mingling it with summoned natural forces. An unseen warm breeze blew, causing the black vines to wither and lose their vigor, no longer able to support the vivid red flowers suspended in midair. The wilted vines dangled lifelessly from the second floor. Not a bad result, Aurora mused to herself. She had obtained the spell from a member of the curly-haired baboons research society. Intended as a gardening spell for weeding, Aurora had acquired it at a bargain price, thinking it would be useful someday. Typically, it was used to clear weeds from building walls, but today it proved invaluable. Nonetheless, the abyssal black vines were unnaturally resilient. They merely withered and didn't perish instantly. This bought time for Valentine, who summoned the golden and illusory fire of light to incinerate the vile creatures in the corridor and rooms. Ryan then flooded the area with the pure sunrise gleam, banishing all evil and obliterating all illusions. Confronted with this situation he was powerless in, Hunter Lumion stifled his urge to perform the enigmatic dance. He observed his sister and the three outsiders collaborate to eradicate the anomaly that had invaded the second floor. Soon, the black vines and red flowers disintegrated into smoke. But Leah's veil and the silver bells on her boots continued to jingle, signaling that danger still lurked. Lumion swiftly surveyed the scene and sniffed. The air doesn't smell right. A faint, sweet scent lingered. I feel a little dizzy and want to sleep, Leah confessed her unease. The fumes from the burning vines and flowers contain an anesthetic? How sinister. Aurora, possessing extensive mysticism knowledge, acted promptly. She produced a handful of transparent powder and scattered it forward. A fierce wind materialized from nowhere, gusting through every corner of the second floor. Ryan, Lumion, Valentine, and Leah dashed into separate rooms, throwing open the windows that had been sealed by the black vines. As the innocuous wind subsided, Aurora turned to Lumion and inquired, "And now?" Lumion sniffed cautiously. "Don't smell it anymore." "I feel better too," Leah chimed in. At that moment, the silver bells on her veil and boots ceased their movement. The crisis was averted. A probing attack from the Padre and company, Aurora speculated. Lumion glanced at Valentine, who appeared troubled. Could be Guillaume Benet, who just received a boon, or the already powerful shepherd Pierre Barry. Valentine's expression softened at Lumion's choice of words. Ryan surveyed the area and declared in a deep voice, "Whichever the case, we must heighten our vigilance. From now on, let's split into 2 groups for shifts. We'll alternate between resting and standing guard, day or night. A single guard risked being ambushed without timely assistance." "No problem." Aurora and Lumion exchanged glances before adding, "I'll be in the same group as my brother." Ryan and the others didn't object. Over the next few days, the 2 groups maintained a watchful eye in 6-hour rotations. Although nothing transpired, as Lent drew near, they all felt the impending danger, anticipating relentless waves of peril. During this period, Lumion continued exploring the dream while resting. He didn't immediately hunt the flaming monster. Instead, he suppressed his impatience and sought to understand the creature's patterns. With his invisibility, long-range tracking, daily observation, and ample patience, Lumion finally gleaned the information he desired. The flaming monster would set traps in the dream clearing each morning, practicing techniques it had mastered for 45 to 90 minutes. It would then follow a fixed route into a flesh-strewn area to replenish its energy. Its afternoon activities were unpredictable, mainly patrolling its territory via different paths. Lumion had yet to discern its criteria for choosing routes. In the evening, it would retrace the fixed route and re-enter the hunting zone. Lumion remained ignorant of its nocturnal activities. He had only spent a maximum of 6 hours in the Dream Ruins, and never ventured there at night. NOVL/B/JNN. The night before Lent, Lumion jolted awake in the hazy gray fog of the dreamscape bedroom. He glanced at fallen Mercury beside him, and his mind snapped into sharp focus. This was the night he would hunt down the flaming monster. Lumion meticulously wrapped his left hand in layers of white bandages. He gathered his supplies: fallen Mercury, his iron-black axe, gray amber perfume, biscuits, cheese, bloodied mutton chops, rope for traps, and a bag of cooled boiled water. Slipping his shotgun over his shoulder, he left his semi-subterranean dwelling. Through the thin gray fog, he ventured into a barren wasteland, riddled with cracks. He entered the dreamlike ruins, and strode toward the clearing, where the flaming monster often lurked. Hearing a distant noise, Lumion veered towards a path he anticipated the creature would take, arriving at a natural trap he'd discovered earlier. A deep pit lay beside the road, with collapsed walls to the front and left. Stacked rocks bordered the right side, and behind it, a mostly collapsed house loomed. Such a trap was difficult to spot. Lumion had found it only after scouring the area multiple times. He crouched behind the pit, tossing in a few sharpened wooden stakes. He covered it with a rope net he'd woven earlier, and camouflaged it with soil. With the simple trap set, he placed his bait: 2 blood-soaked lamb chops, half on solid ground and half suspended above the pit. Lumion stepped back, assessing the precarious balance. He retreated into the mostly collapsed house, perching himself on the remains of an outer wall. He adjusted his position to watch the trap without being seen by passing monsters. Next, he took out the gray amber perfume and sprayed it on the wall. A delicate, sweet scent wafted through the air, carried by sporadic gusts of wind that blew through the ruins. The fragrance clung to the wall and to Lumion. Without hesitation, he leaped away, looping back to the path where the flaming monster would appear, positioning himself closer to its hunting grounds. Once more, he changed direction, crossing the path and entering the ruins of a building opposite. Reaching the rear of the crumbling structure, he stopped, leaned against the wall and waited. As with his strategy against the shotgun monster, Lumion never expected his trap to fool the flaming monster, or wound it severely. These decoys and alarms targeted the creature's keen senses, observation, and behavior. Only a hunter knew how to exploit a hunter's strengths. Of course, all this relied on the target operating primarily on instinct, its intelligence limited to combat. Leaning against the wall, Lumion gripped fallen Mercury in his bandaged left hand, tearing off the pitch-black cloth shrouding its surface. He couldn't know how long it would take for the flaming monster to arrive. All he could do was be patient. Patience was his strong suit, a remnant from his vagrant days. Time crawled by. Unseen by Lumion, a charred, flame-tinged monster entered the path. After walking over 20 meters, its nose twitched. It detected the faint scent of blood. The monster didn't immediately turn. As it continued, it surreptitiously scanned the source of the smell. Passing the collapsed wall, the bloody lamb chops caught its eye, tempting food. But the flaming monster resisted its instincts, not devouring the bait. It pressed on, slowing its pace. Soon, an unusual fragrance filled its nostrils. It instantly deduced the meat was a trap, and a hunter lay in ambush nearby. This hunter seemed different from the one who had previously observed it while invisible. It lacked sufficient knowledge of hunters, and hadn't masked its scent beforehand. Taking a few more steps, the flaming monster used the fragrance and subtle footprints to pinpoint the enemy hiding on the outer wall of the building behind the trap. Feigning ignorance, it increased its distance by another 7 to 8 meters. Suddenly it whirled around, its scarlet flames rapidly condensing into a fireball tinged with white. Boom! With a flick of its right palm, the fireball hurtled towards Lumion's ambush location, collapsing the outer wall and causing the house to shudder. Hearing the explosion from a distance, Lumion abandoned his hiding spot, darting into the clearing, his movements a wild, distorted dance. The explosion was like a signal flare, a stark reminder for him to swiftly ready the second phase of the trap. Lumion and Aurora had devised this intricate plan, luring their prey into sending out their own signal flares. NOVL, B/JNN. In the midst of his mesmerizing dance, Lumion detected the hazy forms of the mouth orifice monster, the shotgun monster, and the skinless monster. By then, the flaming monster had already approached the collapsed wall, searching for any trace of its enemy. Lumion danced for another 10 to 20 seconds, his movements growing more intense. He drew out the ritual silver dagger with his right hand, making a small incision on his left wrist. A single drop of blood emerged, congealing into a tiny sphere. Lumion stepped forward, pivoted, and snatched up the blood droplet, aiming it at the mouth orifice monster. He uttered the word in ancient Hermes, his voice barely above a whisper. At that moment, the flaming monster had discovered the faint footprints Lumion had left behind. Catching a whiff of a subtle scent, it started tracking him. Quickly shouting his follow-up command, Lumion watched as the mouth orifice monster swallowed the blood droplet from the tip of the silver dagger and entered his body. A wave of madness, bloodlust, cruel intent, and ravenous hunger washed over him. Lumion fought back the discomfort, hastily bandaging his insignificant wound with a white strip he'd brought along. Next, he popped a piece of cheese into his mouth, chewing and swallowing to make sure the residual gray amber scent on his body would mask any other mingled odors. Throughout this process, Lumion sprinted to the edge of the road and halted at an inconspicuous spot. He clenched his jaw tight and spun around, carefully retracing his steps along his previous path. Relying on a hunter's observation skills and dancer's exaggerated flexibility, Lumion made sure to leave only faint footprints and no additional marks. It wasn't long before he reached the center of the road and stopped. Maintaining his invisibility, Lumion remained in plain sight on the road. He waited, using shallow cogitation and constant suspension to suppress any thoughts of attacking the flaming monster, a rudimentary way to disrupt its danger premonition. His inspiration came from a hunter's keen self-awareness. Aurora had once written about the tactic of retracing one's footsteps to lie in ambush mid-road in a novel. After 7 or 8 seconds, the flaming monster's pitch-black form appeared in Lumion's sight. Utilizing his uncanny flexibility, he twisted his body to observe the approaching target. The flaming monster followed the faint footprints and scent left behind by its enemy. Uninterrupted, it continued its pursuit. Once back on the main road, it sniffed the air, unsurprised to detect a mild fragrance. It instinctively lowered its head and found the inconspicuous footprints. But it found no trace of traps in the vicinity. Without hesitation, the flaming monster tracked the footprints to the other side of the road. The charred face and displaced eyeballs loomed larger and clearer in Lumion's sight. Holding his breath, Lumion didn't disrupt his cogitation again, striving to empty his mind. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. He lunged at the target, raising the fallen Mercury in his left hand for a swift slash. He didn't wait to close the gap further, fearing that it would trigger the prey's danger sense and prompt evasive maneuvers. The flaming monster suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of danger. Without thinking, it leaped to the side. Simultaneously, its vision captured Lumion's figure, attacking with a pewter-black dirk in his bandaged left hand. They were so close that despite the flaming monster's reaction, evasion was impossible. Lumion collided with it. With a tearing sound, fallen Mercury's sharp blade sank into the flaming monster's right chest. The fate extracted from Noodle Man infiltrated the target's body as an illusory mercury bead. Meanwhile, a river of countless intricate mercury symbols briefly surfaced. Some of the destinies rapidly converged towards the pewter-black blade. Lumion didn't bother selecting the destiny to exchange, letting fallen Mercury do as it wished. Boom! The monster's flames erupted. The forceful shockwave hurled Lumion and his fallen Mercury away. Crimson flames ignited his clothes and scorched his facial skin. Lumion bore the searing pain, twisting his waist midair to alter his trajectory. As soon as he landed, He sprang to his feet and fled. However, unable to re-enter the invisibility state until the flames were extinguished, he remained visible. Boom! Despite his serpentine sprint, Lumion was still knocked off his feet by the fireball's aftershock. His back throbbed with numbing pain. He struggled to his feet, scrambling away from the path and into the ruins where he had been hiding before. The flaming monster pursued Lumion, who was unable to turn invisible once more. The flaming monster pursued relentlessly, hurling crimson fireballs that blasted craters in the earth. Lumion was thrown off balance multiple times. Flames licked at the charred logs that littered the desolate landscape, casting flickering red light in every direction. Lumion barely spared a thought for the fire still consuming his clothes. Gritting his teeth against the searing pain, he was sent sprawling by the shock waves of detonation after detonation. He staggered to his feet and careened wildly towards his destination, veering left, then right, arcing and darting straight ahead. Mercifully, he didn't have far to go based on his plan. Just as he felt the taste of blood in his mouth, and his body threatened to give out, a dilapidated building loomed before him. Boom! Lumion contorted his body mid-stride, narrowly avoiding a fireball. The scarlet projectile exploded just ahead, unleashing a hellish maelstrom of flames. Seizing the moment, Lumion dropped to the ground and rolled beneath the worst of the conflagration. With the momentum, he tumbled into the partially collapsed structure. The flaming monster halted and hesitated, wary of pursuing its prey into a potential death trap. It watched as Lumion rolled deeper into the building, summoning a swarm of red fire ravens around it. Their screeches filled the air as they took flight. Half of them dove towards the building's support beams, while the others bore down on Lumion from all sides. These avian flames were unerring, constantly adjusting their trajectories to match Lumion's movements. In that instant, the flaming monster could almost see its enemy's charred remains. Fire ravens were far more difficult to dodge than mere fireballs. And then, Lumion disappeared from the monster's view. He had rolled into a well-preserved basement. Bang! Lumion slammed the wooden door shut and leaped aside, using the force of the impact. Swoosh! 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 The scarlet fire ravens slammed into the door. Boom! The heavy door disintegrated into flaming splinters. Rumble! The remaining fire ravens struck their intended targets, bringing down the decaying structure in a torrent of debris. Stone, wood, and dust engulfed the area, entombing the basement. Lumion had already taken refuge in a corner, using the accumulated dirt to smother the flames that clung to him. n/o/vel/b/forward/jan.c//om. But he was still badly burned, his internal organs battered by the force of the explosions. Without swift medical attention, he wouldn't last another day. The flaming monster's attack had been devastating, even more potent than Ryan Sands' hurricane of light. Lumion had intended to use invisibility to elude the flaming monster, slipping into the basement to perform his enigmatic sacrificial dance, activating the blackthorn symbol on his chest to terrify his foe. He'd planned to bide his time for fallen Mercury to complete the exchange of fate. But the persistent fire had thwarted his invisibility, nearly costing him his life. The one consolation was that he had a backup plan in the event he couldn't escape the monster's pursuit, nor could he perform his sacrificial dance in peace. He'd even considered collapsing the building to bury the basement and buy time. But the flaming monster had done the job for him. Phew! Exhaling deeply, Lumion sat cross-legged. He retrieved the bottle of gray amber perfume from Aurora, unscrewed the cap, and placed it before him. Outside the demolished building, the flaming monster's gaze cut through the swirling dust, searching for any trace of its quarry. It was certain that the cunning intruder wouldn't have been buried alive so easily. Given the complexity of the traps he'd laid and his intimate knowledge of the ruins, he must have left himself an escape route. The flaming monster wasn't particularly intelligent, but its hunter's instincts led it to circle the collapsed building. In less than 10 seconds, it discovered a hidden cave entrance angling downward. The opening was concealed by debris from the fallen structure, sheltered from the ensuing collapse. It was difficult to spot and tucked away in a discreet location. The monster raised its right hand, conjuring a fist-sized white fireball in its palm. With a sudden lunge, it hurled the fireball down the passageway. The flames streaked through the air, penetrated the basement and collided with the far wall. Boom! The blast wave didn't affect Lumion, who was deliberately hiding in another corner. It only overturned the bottle of gray amber perfume in front of him and quaked the entire basement. The gurgle of liquid flowed from the open bottle, its elegant and sweet fragrance intensifying instantly. Lumion leaned against the wall, eyes closed, lost in cogitation. His mind conjured a crimson sun, holding it steady for a few seconds. Suddenly, a terrifying sound reached Lumion's ears, as if from an infinite distance, yet unnervingly close. Blue veins bulged across his face, hands and neck, quickly turning red. Simultaneously, silver-black spots seeped from his skin. He opened his mouth to scream, but collapsed and curled up before a sound could escape. Fallen mercury slipped from Lumion's left palm, but it dared not make a move. It didn't even attempt to approach his exposed face or right hand to create a marionette through contact. It just quivered there violently. Outside the basement, the monster poised to conjure a fireball froze beside the entrance Lumion had excavated. It couldn't help but shudder. A few seconds later, it fled, abandoning the hunt. Lumion plunged into a darkness teeming with flickering flames. His mind was overwhelmed with excruciating pain and malevolent thoughts. In that moment, death seemed preferable. He sensed something deep within him rapidly growing and taking form. It appeared to be a trauma, composed of all negative personalities and a particular will. Once assembled into human shape, it would utterly supplant the original him. Amid the unending darkness of despair and pain, Lumion caught a whiff of a scent, elegant and sweet. It was Aurora's fragrance, a familiar aroma. Aurora! Grande, sir! Lumion slowly regained his composure, as if hearing the comforting melody once more. I want to live. The loop hasn't ended yet. A rush of thoughts flooded back to him. Lumion finally vanquished the pitch-black will and the agony-laced darkness within his heart and opened his eyes. The first thing in his sight was the toppled bottle of gray amber perfume on the ground. It toppled. Lumion's heart ached as he reached out his right hand. Initially, he'd only intended to mimic Aurora's use of incense to control his symptoms and rely on the natural perfume as a wake-up call. Unexpectedly, more than half the bottle had spilled. In the next instant, his body quivered. He saw the charred, blood-stained back of his hand and the silver-black circular spots that had yet to fade. Without needing a reminder, Lumion could smell the unfamiliar, hair-raising scent on himself. If he crossed paths with Valentine now, he'd be purified by his holy light summoning without revealing a thing. Lumion scooped up the remaining half of the gray amber perfume, tightened the cap, and stowed it away. He then picked up Fallen Mercury, still trembling violently, and asked in Hermes, "Is the fate exchange over?" Fallen Mercury swiftly shook left and right, signaling it wasn't. Lumion exhaled in relief. He feared that by the time he awoke, the fate exchange would have been completed. The shock would last no more than a minute. If he couldn't locate the flaming monster in time, his recent torment would be futile. Breathe in, breathe out. Lumion adjusted his dreadful condition and mustered his remaining strength before crawling out of the basement through the hole he had dug earlier. Each motion tugged at various wounds, making him wince in pain. Upon exiting the basement, Lumion searched for the flaming monster's tracks and sighed inwardly. Using cogitation in such a state, and fully activating the thorn symbol on my chest is downright suicidal. I haven't done it since becoming a hunter, barely repressing the symptoms with gray amber scent. Had I done it a few times before, my body might have mutated slightly, turning me into a monster. I can't risk this for a while unless I have a death wish. He opted for cogitation to fully activate the black thorn symbol on his chest, rather than the sacrificial dance's partial activation, as time was of the essence, and he couldn't perform the dance. With cogitation, he could frighten off the flaming monster in 5 or 6 seconds. The enigmatic sacrificial dance, however, took 30 to 40 seconds, even with his familiarity. In Lumion's hunting strategy, this was his last resort. If he couldn't evade the flaming monster's pursuit by other means, he'd attempt cogitation. Lumion hadn't anticipated that cogitation would leave him gravely injured from the start, and on the brink of losing control, turning into a monster. Before long, Lumion discovered the flaming monster's tracks and pursued them. A few minutes later, the prince appeared fresher, so he slowed his pace. Soon after, fallen Mercury shuddered on its own, notifying Lumion that the fate exchange was complete. Without hesitation, Lumion brandished the iron-black axe and charged forward, following the flaming monster's footprints. In under 20 seconds, he spotted the scorched and smoldering prey. It cowered in a rock-encircled corner, quaking. Lumion dashed over, cast aside fallen Mercury, and seized the axe with both hands, cleaving down with all his might. With a dull thud, the flaming monster's head and body separated. Bright red blood spurted out violently, igniting into scarlet flame clusters on the ground. Lumion, unable to hold on any longer, collapsed to the ground with his axe. Lumion slumped to the ground, gasping for breath. He could barely muster the strength to move a finger. Silently, he observed the crimson flames flickering on the ground, their intensity gradually diminishing until they snuffed out. During this time, Lumion managed to lean forward and grab the fallen Mercury with his left hand, while his right hand tightly gripped the iron-black axe, ready for any unexpected threats. His focus was unwavering, and he remained on high alert. Inwardly, he prayed to the eternal blazing sun and the unknown great being, hoping they would shield him from harm. In his current state, even a mundane foe like the skinless monster could easily take him down, let alone the possibility of the flaming creature reviving itself unexpectedly. As time ticked by, Lumion's spirituality and stamina gradually improved, but his injuries only worsened, leaving him disoriented and unfocused. Hunters need to be cautious, level-headed, and patient, capable of using their environment to their advantage. Above all, they require courage. Courage to confront the unexpected, to persevere in the face of crisis, to steel oneself when escape seems impossible, and to find a path out of the jaws of death. Distracted by these thoughts, Lumion suddenly felt as if the hunter potion coursing through him had been fully absorbed. It was as if a barrier had shattered, and a tiny spark had merged with every fiber of his being. All traces of Lumion's loss of control vanished, and his condition immediately improved. Slowly, he rose to his feet and heaved a quiet sigh. I've actually digested it. This meant he was ready for the next potion. Lumion, clutching the pewter-black dirk in his bandaged left hand, scanned his surroundings. Occasionally, he fixated on the flaming monster's remains, patiently awaiting the appearance of the Beyonder characteristics. Unlike the shotgun monster's swift transformation, Lumion waited for half an hour. He wondered if the flaming monster still lived, and whether he should strike it a few more times. Finally, on the verge of collapsing from his injuries, red sparks burst forth from the monster's body. Like fireflies, they swarmed around the corpse before gradually coalescing into a scarlet object resembling a heart. The heart pulsed, its surface pocked with countless tiny holes, from which indistinct flames seeped. Is this the main ingredient for the pyromaniac potion? Lumion mused, reaching down to pick it up. A searing pain radiated from his palm straight to his mind, making him instinctively want to fling that heart away to escape the agony. Luckily, Lumion's skin had been numbed by the flaming monster's burns, allowing him to barely tolerate the relatively minor pain. He tried wrapping the heart in a strip of cloth, but it instantly incinerated the fabric, reducing it to ashes. After a moment's thought, Lumion set the Beyonder ingredient on the ground, wrapped the fallen Mercury in the remaining black cloth, and secured it at his waist. Next, he emptied the contents of the cloth bag, containing the lead bullets, into his pocket. He then filled the bag halfway with soil from the area before tossing in the flame-wreathed heart. But Lumion didn't stop there. He continued shoveling soil into the bag until the heart was entirely encased in layers of inflammable earth. Exhaling, he carried the bag to the edge of the ruins, pondering a newly discovered problem. I'm only a Sequence 9, and this is the main ingredient for the corresponding Sequence 7 pyromaniac. I can't just advance to Sequence 7, can I? This will make me lose control. I initially thought the flaming monster would yield a pyromaniac, provoker, and hunter Beyonder characteristic, but it's all mixed together. Uncertain of what to do, Lumion stumbled away. Miraculously, He didn't encounter a single monster on his way back. In his weakened state, any confrontation would have spelled disaster. His only hope was to rely on his keen observation and sharp senses to detect danger early and avoid it. After an indeterminate amount of time, Lumion exited the dream ruins and traversed the barren wilderness, arriving back at his semi-subterranean two-story dwelling. Laboriously, he climbed to the second floor and removed the fallen mercury, the cloth bag with the pyromaniac ingredient, and the iron black axe. He placed them on the bedside table, or tossed them to the floor before staggering to the full-length mirror embedded in the wardrobe. In the mirror, Lumion saw his ghostly pale face, marred by flame scars and faint silver-black patches on his skin. His blue eyes flickered with an illusory silvery hue, entwined with darkness. This was a sign that he had sustained severe injuries and nearly lost control. If not for his home field advantage in the dream ruins, or the acquisition of fallen mercury and invisibility, Lumion would have had no chance of defeating the flaming monster. Munching on jerky and cheese to stave off the intense hunger left by his possession, he collapsed onto the bed. He desperately needed to return to reality and rest for a while, allowing his body to recover swiftly. Sunlight pierced through the curtains, casting the bedroom in a soft glow that highlighted Aurora's desk, cluttered with reference materials, reading notebooks, and stacks of manuscripts. It also illuminated a wardrobe filled with dresses and an exquisite full-body mirror. Lumion opened his eyes to meet his sister's light blue gaze. Aurora watched him stir, her voice laced with concern. "How is it? Is everything all right?" She knew that her brother had ventured into the dream ruins to hunt the flaming monster this time. "I succeeded." Lumion sat up, his head feeling foggy. His skin tingled, and his bones threatened to snap. But compared to the excruciating pain that had nearly killed him in the dream, this was nothing. He lowered his gaze to examine his body. Red, swollen patches covered his skin, as if he were suffering from an allergic reaction. "That's good," Aurora sighed with relief. "An hour ago, you twitched all over and kicked me awake." Lumion laughed, self-deprecating. "It was indeed dangerous back then. I almost lost control. I was hesitant to wake you up, but you quickly calmed down and didn't scare me anymore," Aurora said, visibly relieved. Lumion's heart stirred. "And you just kept looking at me?" "That's right." Aurora nodded calmly. "If anything happens, I have to shake you awake and bring you back to reality. You can't die in your dreams." Lumion suddenly felt the pain, struggle, and fear of nearly dying in his dream dissipate, replaced by a warm current surging from the depths of his heart. He asked, almost without thinking, "You didn't wake up because I kicked you, did you? You haven't slept at all, have you?" Aurora smiled and said, "That was my original plan, but considering how long you'd have to wait for that monster, and how I just finished my night duty, if I didn't catch up on sleep, I'd definitely be in a daze later. It'd be easy for me to make a mistake and not wake you up in time. So, I decided to put my hand on you and take the chance to catch some shut-eye. This way, I'd be able to sense any movement and wake up quickly. Haha, I was indeed kicked by you." As she spoke, she pointed at her right calf, where a visible bruise had formed. Before Lumion could respond, she asked, "Tell me the details." Suppressing his voice, Lumion recounted his ordeal, describing how he set up the trap, ambushed the monster, and how his clothes caught fire. Unable to turn invisible, he had no choice but to flee into the basement and fully activate the black thorn symbol with cogitation. Aurora listened intently, her expression occasionally betraying her worry for her brother's perilous situation. She was the kind of person who easily immersed herself in stories. As the tale drew to a close, Lumion raised a question. "How do I separate Provoker from the pyromaniac beyonder characteristic?" He didn't know where to find the potion formula. Aurora thought for a moment and said, "I don't know how to separate them. I've only heard that you might need the help of a high-level beyonder for such a situation." A demigod? Lumion guessed. There were probably only 3 people he knew who had reached sequence 4. The enigmatic lady, Madame Pualis, and the one lying in the coffin in the tomb. Aurora nodded. "I think so. Actually, you don't have to worry. I suspect the mysterious lady will come to you soon and provide some help. She always appears at critical points in your growth." This time should be no exception. After all, the loop hasn't been resolved, and the secret of the dream ruins remains locked away. Go to OL Tavern to find her? Lumion frowned. Their agreement with Ryan and the others was to avoid going out as much as possible. Aurora tersely acknowledged his words. Let's wait a while. She might visit us directly. Aurora sighed and said, for ordinary Beyonders, the potion formula isn't a problem, but you're different. There's corruption sealed in your body, and you can lose control if there's the slightest issue. You still need a complete and correct provoker potion formula. Why don't ordinary Beyonders need potion formulas? Lumion asked, surprised. Aurora explained, it's not that they don't need them, but anyone below sequence 7 can advance just by consuming the main ingredient. Doesn't that risk losing control? Lumion asked, astonished. Aurora acknowledged tersely. Years ago, there was a high chance of losing control. But recently, sequence 9 and sequence 8 Beyonder characteristics can indeed be consumed directly. However, it's about 20 to 30% more dangerous than concocting a potion. Right, that's the conclusion reached by our president, Gandalf. Why? Just as Lumion was about to ask, a familiar song echoed from outside the house. n/o/vel/b/jan.c//om. The siblings exchanged solemn glances. Lent had begun, and the spring elf entourage had reached them. A group of young men encircled Ava, singing and dancing, as they arrived outside the Lumion residence. Guillaume Jr. of the Barry family strode to the door and slammed at it. He was a friend of Lumion, Raimund and Ava. With curly brown hair and prominent freckles, his blue eyes appeared smaller than average, as if perpetually narrowed. With a creak, Aurora appeared before them. Her blonde hair tied up, she wore a formal flounce-lined light-collared dress. Aurora exuded energy, her face radiant. Impossible to tell she hadn't slept well the night before. Ava, donning a laurel crown woven from tree branches and flowers, stepped forward and sang, I'm the elf of spring, with a sweet face and a joyful ring. Come and sing, come and dance, for this is the only way to obtain a harvest that will stay. Aurora listened quietly, took the leaf, and handed Ava a small pottery jar containing animal fat. Bumper harvest! Bumper harvest! The young men cheered. As the spring elf entourage set off for the next location, Guillaume Jr. deliberately lagged behind and asked Aurora, Where's Lumion? I haven't seen him in the past 2 days. Is he not participating in the Lent celebration? Aurora laughed and replied, He's sick. Sick? Guillaume Jr. was slightly surprised. He gets sick too. In his mind, Lumion was always brimming with energy. At most, he'd suffer minor injuries from a prank gone awry. I'll be worried if he never gets sick, Aurora replied jokingly. All humans fall sick. Guillaume Jr. hurriedly waved at Aurora, as the spring elf entourage moved further away. Tell Lumion I'll visit him after Lent. NOV-L-B //JNN. Aurora nodded slightly, watching Guillaume Jr. sprint towards the entourage that had stopped in front of the next building. How was it? Lumion stuck his head out beside his sister. Aurora thought for a moment and said, They're still normal, but I wonder what will happen at the end of the celebration. Lumion recalled the bloody scene of Ava's beheading at the celebration's end, and the strange mood that agitated the young people. They had either gone mad sending off the spring elf, or succumbed to mental and physical breakdown, collapsing to the ground. No one was spared. Silently, he glanced at Ava singing in front of the neighbor's house, and Guillaume Jr. and company surrounding her. He slowly withdrew his gaze. Ryan, Leah, and Valentine also arrived on the first floor, and looked out through the window. We have to be very careful from now on, Ryan said in a deep voice after the spring elf entourage left the area. Aurora nodded and said, Yeah. Before the celebration ended, they quickly prepared lunch, and filled their stomachs. Clang, clang, clang. The classic wall clock on the first floor chimed, signifying noon. Lumion and the others, having tidied up the dining room, exchanged tense glances. If the Lent celebration had gone smoothly, it would have ended by now. And if the ritual to send the spring elf off was completed, who knew what Cordu would become? In their semi-subterranean building, Lumion needed to raise his head slightly to see the situation outside the window. The sky was a brilliant azure, filled with white clouds. The sun shone brightly, and there were no dark clouds, fog, or dim light as he had imagined. Leah paced around the stove, the small silver bells on her veil, and boots tinkling non-stop. It was neither intense nor soothing. Seeing Aurora looking at her, she explained, "We're already in danger, and it's been an extended period of danger, but it's manageable at the moment." Aurora acknowledged and didn't inquire further. Ryan, on the other hand, sighed and said, "By the 12th night, it would be great if it was always at this level." Aurora blinked, embarrassed to tell this Dawn Paladin of the machinery hive mind not to jinx it. Although Lumien's heart was heavy, he still smiled and replied to Ryan, "There's a proverb in our Dirige region that says, good and bad are all predestined. Regardless of how worried we are, we can't change what happens next." What he didn't say was, the only thing they could do was muster up the courage to face it. In the intermittent conversation that followed, the five of them were on guard against any abnormalities. However, be it the weather or the birds, everything was so normal that it only instilled greater fear in them. After almost 30 minutes, they found themselves staring at the door simultaneously. Footsteps drew near. Soon after, Aurora's doorbell rang, the sound reverberating through the first floor. Exchanging a glance with his sister, Lumion cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. The man who had rung the doorbell was their neighbor Louis Beto. "What's going on?" Lumion cracked the door open, smiling. Louis Beto had black hair and blue eyes. He was in his 40s and had been injured while harvesting wheat in the fields when he was young. He had only 3 fingers on his left hand. Clad in a grayish-blue blazer and dark pants, he said timidly, "I need to borrow your oven. It's Lent. We must bake some fresh bread for the kids." As he spoke, he lifted the flour bag and nudged the bag of inferior coal beside him. Lumion hesitated for a moment before turning to Aurora. Aurora nodded, signaling him to let Louis Beto in. She had already discussed it with Ryan and the others in hushed tones, intending to observe the changes in the villagers who had participated in the Lent celebration up close. "Just baking bread? I thought you'd make some bacon for your kids." Lumion stepped aside and teased Louis Beto with a grin. Louis Beto replied cautiously, "If we have a bumper harvest this year, there should be plenty of bacon." His eyes brimmed with anticipation, as if he was certain of a bountiful harvest. Once inside, Louis Beto greeted Aurora and headed to the oven, busying himself. The more Lumion and his companions observed, the stranger they found him. Louis Beto didn't even glance at Ryan, Leah, and Valentine, as if they were invisible. It was like a person who had already turned into a monster, trying their best to pretend to be normal. However, as long as they encountered something that exceeded their original memories, they would display obvious abnormalities or ignore it. Lumion instantly thought of the Deputy Padre Michel Garriga. Initially, he appeared fine, but recently, all that remained were his daily activities of eating, sleeping, and urging others to pray. He ignored everything else. Under the watchful eyes of the 3 foreigners, Louis Beto baked his bread mechanically, occasionally conversing with Lumion and Aurora. It was very normal, yet very abnormal. After Louis Beto left with the baked bread, Aurora looked at Ryan and the others, smiling wryly. Everyone who participated in the Lent celebration must have become like this. "It's like being replaced by a monster bit by bit," Leah exclaimed sincerely. She no longer forced a smile on her face. Lumion had already regained his composure and posed a question. "How can we save someone like this if we want to?" "The only thing I can think of is purification," Valentine replied with a sigh. "But if the abnormality is already closely integrated with humans, the final outcome might be purification together." At that moment, 2 more villagers passed by the window. One of them was a regular customer of Oel Tavern and Pierre Guillaume, who had scrounged Ryan's absinthe in a previous cycle. He was happily chatting with his companion, seemingly discussing the excitement of the Lent celebration. As they passed Lumion's door, they simultaneously turned their heads to look inside the house, their expressions eerily grim. After an instant, they withdrew their gazes and resumed their conversation, smiles plastered on their faces. If Lumion and his companions hadn't been watching the outside whenever someone passed by, they wouldn't have noticed the fleeting change in their expressions. The louder the laughter outside, the more suffocated they felt. Silence took over the conversation. Eventually, the two villagers left, and Aurora sighed, saying, "This isn't just being replaced by monsters bit by bit. I suspect that the entire village is filled with monsters wearing human skin. Except for us. Is this the complete Lent celebration?" Lumion couldn't help but mutter to himself. Ryan sternly warned, "It's going to get tougher every day. Everyone hang in there." From noon to night, they kept vigil against mutated villagers attacking the house. But apart from the occasional passerby who gazed inside with a sullen or cold expression, nothing happened. The situation weighed heavily on Aurora and the others. Ryan surveyed the room and said gently, "There are still a few days until the 12th night. Don't be so tense. After dinner, we'll split into 2 groups and take turns resting. We must maintain a good mental state." With such an experienced beyonder with a calm demeanor, both Aurora and Lumion felt more at ease. At midnight, Aurora and Lumion woke Leah and the others, then retreated to their bedroom. Lumion glanced at the door and lowered his voice. "That mysterious woman hasn't appeared. Should I find an opportunity to go out tomorrow and take a look at OL Tavern? Everyone in the village might be a monster now. It'll be very dangerous if you go out." Aurora disagreed. She pondered for a moment and said, "Let's wait a little longer. If the mysterious woman doesn't appear tomorrow morning, I'll accompany you to OL Tavern in the afternoon." Lumion hesitated for a moment before nodding. He planned to discuss with his sister tomorrow morning if they should ask Ryan and the others for help. The 5 of them could act together. In the bedroom filled with a faint gray fog, Lumion opened his eyes. He sat up and checked his body, realizing that his severe injuries had completely healed. Just as he was about to marvel at the fact, he suddenly heard the sound of a doorbell ringing. Someone's ringing the doorbell? The thought instinctively flashed through Lumion's mind. He habitually prepared to go down to the first floor to see who was visiting. He had just taken a step when his entire body froze. This was the dream ruins. How could anyone visit? Instantly, Lumion tensed up. He spun around and returned to the bed, scooping up fallen mercury with his bandaged left hand. Grabbing his shotgun, he strode to the bedroom window while the doorbell continued to ring. He scrutinized the entrance. There was no one there. In that moment, Lumion's heart felt like it was about to seize. He intended to activate his spirit vision for a better look, since he would hear the maddening and terrifying sound and show signs of losing control after entering cogitation for a few seconds in the dream ruins. He couldn't use this ability smoothly. It took him a while to complete the corresponding operation. However, even with his spirit vision activated, he still didn't notice anyone at the door. Yet the doorbell rang incessantly. As his thoughts raced, Lumion seriously considered returning to bed, forcing himself to sleep and escape the dream. But he felt that even if he returned to reality, he might not be able to evade the subsequent attack, considering the unknown danger that could invade his semi-subterranean 2-story building at any moment. 2 scenarios. If the person ringing the doorbell can enter, going to bed is as good as surrendering. If they can't enter, I'll be safe as long as I don't open the door myself. Regardless, I must go downstairs and take a look. Lumion made up his mind quickly. He sheathed fallen mercury at his waist, clipped his axe, and hoisted his shotgun. He stepped out of the room and cautiously descended the stairs. Upon reaching the first floor, a figure came into view. At the 6-person dining table sat the enigmatic woman Lumion had been searching for. She wore a white blouse with a large bow at the collar and loose pearl gray pants. Her casual attire was deceptively elegant. She sipped a pale golden drink, a short black hat beside her. Lumion relaxed and approached the mysterious woman with brown hair and blue eyes. He set the shotgun and axe aside, pulled out a chair opposite the dining table and sat down. He asked, "You can enter here?" The woman set her glass down and smiled. "How else do you think those materials were delivered to your room?" As she spoke, the jingling sound ceased. Lumion glanced at the door, puzzled. "Since you're already inside, why were you still ringing the doorbell?" She smiled and replied, "That's basic courtesy. Courtesy that can scare people to death?" Lumion dared only to mutter inwardly. He got straight to the point. I've obtained the pyromaniac Beyonder ingredient. It should be pyromaniac. The woman nodded gently. I know. That's why I came to see you. Are you willing to help me separate the provoker Beyonder characteristics and give me the corresponding potion formula? Lumion suppressed his sudden joy and asked. I was planning on finding you at OL Tavern. As for the price he would have to pay, he no longer cared. The lady smiled and said, with Corda's current situation, it's very dangerous for you to go out, so I came here directly. I can indeed provide the help you want, but it won't be free this time. Lumion noticed that indecipherable emotion in the woman's eyes again, but the notion that it was no longer free reassured him. The unknown was even more terrifying. What is the price I need to pay? He asked without hesitation. She replied calmly, the separated pyromaniac and hunter Beyonder characteristics belong to me. That simple. Lumion was surprised. He didn't even think of it as a price. After all, he wouldn't be able to use the pyromaniac Beyonder characteristics for a long time. She continued, in addition to the help I originally provided, if there's any more in the future, if there's a future for you, you have to do something for me. Lumion sensed the inscrutable emotion in her eyes intensify. He probed, what if I don't? She laughed. Isn't it common for investments to fail? Didn't your sister lose some money buying stocks with divination? What do you need me to do? Lumion asked without hesitation. She sighed softly. Let's talk about it if you can survive. All right. Give me the Beyonder characteristic you obtained. Lumion rose and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. He barely restrained himself from sprinting up the staircase. When she could no longer see him, he dashed. Soon, Lumion returned to the first floor with the cloth bag containing the pyromaniac Beyonder characteristic and approached the dining table. The woman raised her glass again and sipped the pale gold liquid. What's this? Lumion asked casually. N/O/vel/b//n.c//om. She explained simply, it's an aperitif from Trier called Black Polka. It's brewed from ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves soaked in sweet wine for a long time. It tastes pretty good. Having raised the topic merely to build rapport, Lumion didn't pry further. He opened the cloth bag and extracted the burning heart from the soil. A scorching sensation seared his palm. Enduring the mild pain, he leaned forward and handed the Beyonder characteristic to the woman across the dining table. She extended her left palm and let the heart hover in midair. She glanced at Lumion and chuckled. When storing Beyonder characteristics in the future, remember to change their environment every once in a while. If such a thing comes into contact with something for too long, it's very likely to fuse with it and become a mystical item that needs to be sealed. Is that so? Lumion asked. How often do I need to make a change? Normally, it takes 2 to 3 days, the woman said nonchalantly, but accidents do happen. I recommend switching environments every 24 hours. With proper sealing and preservation, it could last months or even years. Also, if you've already mixed Beyonder ingredients into a potion, drink it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the liquid might merge with the bottle. As she spoke, a sudden flash enveloped her body, and the burning heart transformed into countless red fireflies. The fireflies danced and swirled, coalescing into 3 distinct objects. One was a dark red, springy, textured object. Another was a shrunken version of the burning heart, now missing numerous holes. The last was a black stone with a liquid-like surface and a potent odor. The woman's right palm caressed the 3 objects, causing 2 to vanish into thin air. All that remained on the dining table was the dark rock, about half the size of a fist. Is this the provoker Beyonder characteristic? Lumion asked eagerly. The woman produced a post-it note and a silver fountain pen, scribbling down the potion formula, then reminded him, you still lack mystical knowledge. After killing the monster, you only took the Beyonder characteristic. Such Beyonder creatures are rich in spirituality. Many of their parts can be used to make charms, lotions, and ingredients for certain spells and rituals. For example, its blood is a supplementary ingredient for the pyromaniac potion. Although the pyromaniac potion requires fire salamander blood, the monster's blood will do. It's essentially the same, and the effects might even be better. The more Lumion listened, the more regretful he became. Although Aurora's adventure novels included scenes of hunting monsters and harvesting parts, he hadn't connected this to reality. He believed the flaming monster's only value was its beyonder characteristic. And now, retrieving it was impossible. The blood would have dried by now. The woman ignored his reaction, tearing off the top note and letting it float toward Lumion. Lumion grabbed it and read the words eagerly. Provoker potion formula. Main ingredient. 1 provoker beyonder characteristic. Supplementary ingredients. 50 milliliters of distilled liquor, 10 drops of honeysuckle extract, 5 grams of grapevine powder, 10 grams of fern powder. Usage, drink it directly. After finishing, Lumion asked, puzzled, there aren't any materials rich in spirituality. Like the fire salamander's blood. She smiled and replied, different potions have different requirements. Yours mainly relies on symbolic mysticism. For example, ferns symbolize being easily influenced by others. This aligns with the essence of a provoker. So a provoker needs to sway others with their words? Lumion tucked the note away, pondering where he might find the supplementary ingredients. Distilled liquor was available at home. Aurora used it in certain dishes. Grapevines and ferns were abundant in Darige, though venturing out might be risky. The only item left was honeysuckle. He'd have to ask Aurora if she had any among her spellcasting supplies. When Lumion looked up again, the woman across from him, along with the black short hat and the black polka aperitif, had disappeared. He hadn't even noticed when she'd left. This despite the fact that his spirit vision hadn't been deactivated the entire time. Phew. Lumion exhaled and headed back to the bedroom, clutching the provoker beyonder characteristic and the potion formula, anticipation swelling within him. He quickly lay down on the bed, intending to return to reality and consult Aurora, hoping to gather the additional ingredients by nightfall. He didn't care that his spirit vision was still active. It would deactivate on its own once he fell asleep. In the dead of night, Lumion opened his eyes and glanced over at Aurora. He couldn't wait to share the news of acquiring the provoker potion formula with his sister. Yet almost simultaneously, he spotted Aurora's mouth open slightly, a hazy, translucent figure emerging. It was a bizarre lizard-like creature. Lumion's gaze locked in place. As the ethereal lizard surveyed its surroundings, he instinctively shut his eyes. The lizard darted its gaze around before quickly scurrying away from Aurora's mouth and exiting the room. Lumion reopened his eyes, staring at his sister in bewilderment. Aurora's face was shrouded in darkness. Her mouth hung slightly open as she slumbered peacefully. Lumion observed her motionless, as if he'd become a statue. In the thick of night, his heart sank further into despair. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The second hand of the wall clock echoed through the dark room. After what felt like an eternity, Lumion finally shook off his nightmare. He hastily reached over, gripping Aurora's shoulders and shaking her vigorously. Wake up! Wake up! He stifled his voice, careful not to alert the 3 official investigators on night duty. Aurora's eyes remained tightly shut, her mouth slightly agape. No matter how much Lumion shook her, she didn't respond. She appeared like a living corpse devoid of a soul. Lumion's shaking gradually slowed, then ceased altogether. He gazed at the sleeping Aurora, frozen in place for a long while. He couldn't comprehend what was happening, or when the issue had begun. The fear he felt mirrored the night he'd witnessed his grandfather's death. From that day on, he'd embarked on his nomadic existence. Lumion's fists clenched tighter, his body quivering slightly. Abruptly, he spun around to face the window. The translucent, ghostly lizard had returned to the room. Lumion leaped off the bed, lunging with his right hand to grab the stunned creature, as it caught sight of him awakening. In the next instant, he jammed the lizard into his mouth, snarling with a twisted expression. You like to worm your way into people's mouths, huh? Fine. I'll give you a chance. As he crammed the blizzard into his mouth, he tore at it ferociously, his eyes bloodshot. The blizzard appeared too petrified to resist. Just then, a voice sounded behind Lumion. What are you doing? It was Aurora's voice. Lumion froze and slowly turned to look at the bed. At some point, Aurora had woken up. Her blonde hair disheveled. She sat up with her light blue eyes filled with confusion and bewilderment. Subconsciously, Lumion glanced down and realized that the blizzard he had captured had long vanished. N/O/vel/b//and.c//om. For a moment, he didn't know if what he had just seen was a nightmare or reality. What's wrong? Aurora frowned. Lumion forced a smile. You kicked me off the bed while having a nightmare. Is that so? Aurora eyed her brother suspiciously, feeling like he was playing a prank. She thought for a moment and said, I had a nightmare. I dreamt that I was grabbed by a huge monster and stuffed into its mouth. I was so frightened that I struggled with all my might and finally woke up. As Lumion listened, a chill ran through his body, as if he had been submerged in an icy lake that hadn't completely thawed. Probably, I really kicked you. Aurora was a little embarrassed. Lumion closed his eyes and smiled. I'm just kidding. I woke up because of something else. He then lowered his voice and said, that mysterious lady appeared in the dream ruins and helped me separate the provoker beyond her characteristic and gave me the correct potion formula. So, you woke up in joy and wanted to ask me if I had the corresponding supplementary ingredients. Aurora deduced. Lumion said with a smile, that's right. By the way, do you have honeysuckle extract, grapevine powder, and fern powder? His smile was much more natural than before, but there seemed to be a flickering glint in his eyes. Aurora mulled it over for a moment before responding. I have both grapevine and fern. One is a ritual ingredient, and the other is a spell medium. Honeysuckle flowers. We always have them at home. Don't you know that I soak them in water for drinking? As she spoke, she rummaged through the hidden pocket of her long dress. That's honeysuckle. Lumion looked at his busy sister and deliberately smiled. Why didn't you ask if I was given free help this time? Aurora took out a short grapevine and said with a smile, you grind it into powder yourself. She didn't seem to hear Lumion's question. All right. Lumion pretended not to have asked. He then said to his sister, the provoker potion still requires distilled liquor. I'll head to the cellar to retrieve it and strive to advance to sequence 8 tonight. It will take some time to make extracts from honeysuckle flowers, Aurora said with a frown. However, the supplementary ingredients for low sequence Beyonders potions aren't that strict. You can use the entire honeysuckle flower as a substitute. You can consume them, as long as the Beyonder characteristics can eventually dissolve. She then looked at the open door and asked in a low voice, aren't you afraid that Ryan and the others will be suspicious if you go to get distilled liquor in the middle of the night? Seeing his sister's reaction, Lumion forced his smile from being too stiff. As a regular at OL Tavern, waking up in the middle of the night and suddenly wanting to drink is very normal. Although alcohol has many disadvantages, it can at least relax my mind to a certain extent. What he meant was to use the excuse that the Lent celebration had ended, and he was under too much stress. He had trouble sleeping and needed hard liquor to relax. Sure, Aurora agreed. Lumion turned around and walked to the door, the smile on his face gradually disappearing. He clenched his fists tightly from beginning to end. After exiting the door and arriving at the corridor, Lumion saw Ryan standing diagonally opposite him in a brown tweed shirt and pale yellow pants. Leah and Valentine were at opposite ends of the corridor. Not sleeping anymore. Ryan raised the kerosene lamp and looked at Lumion. Lumion grinned. I'm heading to the cellar to get some liquor. How about it? Do you want a sip to relax? I don't need it. Ryan nodded. You haven't experienced anything like this before. You're tense and under a lot of stress. It's understandable. Alcohol can indeed help. As he spoke, he walked towards the staircase with the flickering kerosene lamp. I'll go with you. You shouldn't move alone at a time like this. All right. Lumion didn't object. As the two entered the stairs, Leah took the initiative to approach Aurora's bedroom and stand guard at the door. 1 step, 2 steps. Lumion and Ryan descended to the shadowy first floor in silence. As the faint light cast a glow over half the stove, Ryan asked casually, did something happen upstairs? I heard some commotion. Lumion opened his mouth and said with difficulty, Aurora, something's wrong with Aurora. His intention in suggesting they get alcohol from the cellar wasn't to advance tonight. The 2-story building in the Dream Ruins also had a cellar and the distilled liquor. His main goal was to avoid Aurora, and communicate with Ryan and the others about what had just happened. However, when the words reached his lips, he almost couldn't bring himself to say them. He felt that the unsaid words were even more choking than the strongest liquor. Ryan's expression turned serious. "What's the matter?" Lumian took a few deep breaths before saying, "Aurora, like the deputy padre, had a lizard that looked like a mini-elf coming out of her mouth." It was as if all his strength had been drained when he said this. After 7 to 8 seconds, he recounted the entire incident. Instead of waking up willingly, he explained it as happening to wake up and seeing it. Ryan listened quietly and didn't rush him. After he finished, he said gently, "You handled it well. We can't let her know that something's amiss. I'm worried that it will worsen the situation. Continue pretending that nothing happened. At dawn, I'll use the excuse that Cordu has been corrupted and that we need to undergo a purification every day to prevent ourselves from being affected. I'll get Valentine to try and exorcise the lizard." "All right," Lumian replied weakly. He felt that the blizzard had already fused deeply with his sister's soul. It wasn't that easy to exorcise and purify. Ryan glanced at him and patted his shoulder gently. "I can understand how you feel. If something similar happened to my family, I wouldn't be able to stay calm. But you have to remember that impatience can't solve anything. I know Valentine's purification might not be effective, but we have to give it a try to confirm that it won't work. Yes, that abnormality is most likely related to Corda's loop. As long as we can finally break the loop, your sister should be able to recover." "That's right. This is equivalent to corruption. As long as I can remove all the corruption when the loop is lifted, Aurora will definitely be fine." Lumian's eyes gradually lit up as he regained his motivation. Ryan was rather satisfied with his reaction and said gently, "I need to remind you that you have to adapt to your sister's changes in the next few days. It's very likely that she'll be like the deputy padre, gradually losing herself to instincts. She'll act differently, following her memories and strongest emotions without reacting to anything else." Lumian fell silent for a moment before saying, "I'll adapt." His voice became softer and softer until it trailed off. After getting the distilled liquor from the cellar, the two of them returned to the second floor, as if nothing had happened. Upon entering the bedroom, Lumian smiled again. He shook the bottle in his hand at Aurora and whispered, "It worked." Aurora smiled and pointed at the desk. "The honeysuckle, grapevine, and fern are all there." Lumian nodded and placed the bottle on the desk. Then, he lay back on the bed and closed his eyes under the pretext of trying to fall asleep and advance in his dreams as soon as possible. He couldn't fall asleep no matter what. He couldn't figure out when his sister had been corrupted and had the lizard enter her body. During this period, the two of them had been together every second. Even if Aurora went to the washroom, Leah would accompany her, and vice versa. How could there be a problem? If it happened during our sleeping hours, why didn't anything happen to me? Lumian tried his best to recall, hoping to find the source. It would help resolve the abnormality. Suddenly he remembered something. In the previous cycle, Padre Guillaume Benet had remarked that the church didn't want to kill all the adults here and harvest a ruin. He said that he had other means even if Aurora really wanted to deal with them. At that time, he was still an ordinary person. Lumian initially believed that he was relying on Shepherd Pierre Barry, but with the current situation, he had a guess. A crazy guess. Perhaps from the beginning, most people in the village had been parasitized by those strange lizard-like creatures, including Aurora. As the 12th night approached, the corresponding abnormality would become more and more obvious, and some people would show signs earlier. The reason why he was spared was because he had the bluish-black symbol on him. Recalling Aurora's lack of commitment in many matters in the second half of the previous cycle, Lumian felt that his guess might be correct. He couldn't help but grit his teeth. At this moment, Ryan was patrolling the corridor with a kerosene lamp. On the wall beside him, the shadow suddenly lengthened. Almost at the same time, the small silver bells on Leah's veil and boots rang. She felt her shoulders turn abnormally cold.